Once, a prince and princess shared a love so profound it dazzled all who witnessed it. The prince, in his royal uniform, leaned in close, asking if she would comfort him again that night. The princess, with her long pink hair and tiara, blushed in response. However, one day, a sudden, horrifying event shattered their peace. The princess lay lifeless on the ground, her eyes wide with shock, as a small, fairy-like assassin with a knife stood over her. The prince, witnessing the tragedy, screamed in utter despair. The shocking truth echoed through the land. The princess is dead. She was killed, a tale overflowing with blood and mad love, marking the explosive debut of a clumsy-type suspense comedy. Meanwhile, a different assassin, cloaked in black, surveyed a grand castle under the cover of night. She noted the defenses were full of openings, a disappointing lack of challenge. With a sly grin, she identified the princess's room, resolving to finish her task quickly and depart. As she moved, the assassin mused on the life of a princess. Huge marble baths, tea time in a pretty garden, accompanied by maids, wearing elegant dresses. The very idea of such a life, however, made her sick. She continued to ponder, wondering if she would truly be happy if she were a princess, though her expression suggested a deep skepticism. With a sudden resolve, she gripped her dagger, declaring that she held nothing against the princess, but this act was for her own survival. She then moved with swift precision, leaping towards her target. She burst into the princess's room, shouting for her to brace herself. The blonde princess, caught off guard, screamed in terror, as did the prince who was with her, attempting to shield her from the sudden attack. Yet, in the midst of her attack, the assassin's face contorted in distress, and she cried out, pleading for a halt, even as she threatened to kill her target. The assassin's sudden cry of distress was met with confusion. The prince, still shielding the princess, demanded to know why she was targeting her, identifying her as a hitman or assassin. The princess, meanwhile, expressed her indignation, questioning the timing of the attack. Her face contorted in a wide-eyed scream. The princess declared she now had a reason for her outrage. The prince, sensing the princess's escalating fury, noted that her bloodlust had just increased, realizing she was serious about her indignation. He tried to pull her away from the immediate danger. The assassin, still holding her dagger, seemed to be in a state of internal conflict, her face a mask of anguish as she declared her intent to send them both to the other world. The princess, oblivious to the assassin's internal struggle, clung to the prince, expressing her fear and demanding his protection, while he tried to calm her, stating it was not the time for such displays. Suddenly, the assassin lunged forward, a blur of motion. The prince reacted instantly, pushing the princess down and shouting for her to get to safety as she let out a shriek. The princess, now on the floor, looked up with wide, terrified eyes as the assassin's attack continued. The prince, having pushed the princess out of the way, turned his attention back to the assassin, observing her with a questioning expression. In the aftermath, the princess lay motionless on the floor beside the bed, while the prince stood protectively over her, facing the assassin who remained nearby. A close view revealed the princess's still form, her eyes wide and vacant, as if in shock, or worse. The prince, his face a mixture of horror and rage, screamed, accusing an unseen assailant of the princess's murder and demanding to know who was responsible. Overwhelmed with panic, he cried out, asking what he should do, realizing the gravity of the situation. A voice from within him urged him to turn himself in. His distress only deepened as he acknowledged the truth. If the princess was truly dead, then the fault lay entirely with him. As the assassin attempted to approach him, he violently pushed her away, warning her not to touch him or he would kill her. She recoiled, surprised by his sudden aggression. He then turned his fury on her, accusing her of being a murderer and demanding to know what she intended to do about the situation. She stared back, visibly shocked. A sudden, desperate idea sparked in his mind. He asked if she was skilled in disguises, realizing that assassins often possessed such training, his gaze falling upon the lifeless princess on the floor. With a frantic resolve, he declared that she would now become the princess, demanding she disguise herself to assume the royal identity. The assassin's expression shifted to one of utter bewilderment and alarm. She pushed him away, questioning why he had struck her, and vehemently stated that it was impossible for someone like her to be a princess. Yet, a flicker of a long-held dream crossed her mind, the childhood fantasy of being a princess, and she wondered if this impossible demand could somehow be her reality. She then pointed to the still form of the blonde princess, challenging him by asking if he felt no sadness, given he had been so distraught just moments before. He retorted, telling her not to play the victim and accusing her of lying, before confessing that he had never liked how the princess always forced herself upon him. The assassin declared her mission fulfilled and prepared to depart, dismissing his pleas. However, he desperately begged her to impersonate the princess, fearing he would be killed if the truth of the princess's death were ever discovered. He continued to scream, accusing her of being a murderer and demanding to know if she would simply watch him die. The assassin, however, merely scoffed, seemingly unconcerned by his desperate pleas. Turning her back to him, she prepared to depart, remarking that she had, in fact, saved him time. With a final, dismissive farewell, she called him a murderer once more. As she made her way to the balcony, he called out, questioning if she hadn't lived her entire life as an assassin. His words made her pause, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. He pressed his argument with fervent intensity, declaring this a crucial crossroads in her life. He presented her with a choice: continue as an assassin or embrace the role of a princess, a figure who commanded both the people's admiration and the nation's wealth, promising her an elegant and guaranteed life. His words resonated with her, and she found herself on the balcony, contemplating the proposition. A blush crept onto her cheeks as she wondered aloud if she could truly become a princess. He enthusiastically affirmed her potential, insisting she possessed all the qualities necessary to be a princess. He even called her cute, causing her to blush even more deeply in embarrassment. She gazed out at the city, pondering a life as an obedient maid, a stark contrast to the prince's urgent declaration that this was her chance to change her destiny, needing only her affirmative response. Her interest now fully piqued. She began to inquire about the specific luxuries of a princess's life, asking about tea time in a pretty garden, huge marble baths, and, with sparkling eyes, if there were also frilly and sparkly dresses. He readily confirmed all her inquiries, and they quickly reached an agreement. He then clarified the terms of their deal, her new identity as the princess, and the absolute secrecy surrounding the real princess's death. With their pact sealed, they shook hands over the deceased princess's body, a silent agreement to share this dangerous secret and continue to protect each other's hidden truths. She, the assassin, crouched beside the deceased princess, listening as the prince, partially visible, questioned her ability to handle the task. She confidently dismissed his concern, stating it was a simple matter, but then, with wide, intense eyes, declared they needed to clean up the scene immediately. Her expression then shifted to one of annoyance as the prince, off-panel, mistakenly called her princess. She sharply corrected him, asserting her true identity as an assassin, a fact he acknowledged. Moments later, she was outside, diligently digging a grave in the forest, the sounds of her shovel echoing through the night. Under the pale moonlight, she paused, wiping sweat from her brow, her eyes still wide with determination as she considered her progress. She then reflected that this crude burial was preferable to the princess's body being scavenged by wild dogs, offering a quiet apology for not providing a proper tombstone. As she walked away from the freshly dug earth, carrying the shovel, she addressed the deceased princess one last time, hoping she could now rest in peace. She continued her solitary walk through the dark forest, the silence punctuated only by her footsteps. Her thoughts turned inward, a troubled expression on her face. She wondered if she could ever be forgiven for her past as an assassin, for treating human lives so lightly, especially now that she was about to embark on such a promising future. Upon returning to the room, she announced to the prince that she had finished burying the princess, her arms outstretched in a gesture of completion. He greeted her return. She then declared her desire to be spoiled, eagerly anticipating her new life as a princess. The prince, meanwhile, had been busy cleaning the room, remarking that she was better suited as an assassin than a prince, and that the clean scene looked good. The prince sternly cautioned her not to get carried away, reminding her that any slip would reveal her as a fake and expose the truth of the princess's death. He urged her to maintain her guard. As the prince expressed his worry and inquired about the dress, she, now adorned in the elegant gown and tiara, beamed with a newfound, almost childlike excitement. She admired her reflection, asking if she truly resembled the princess. He, however, seemed overwhelmed, muttering about having had enough of women, yet conceded that the dress suited her. She, in turn, playfully warned him not to fall for her by mistake, a hint of mischief in her eyes. Despite her jest, he quickly refocused, emphasizing that there was one crucial thing she needed to be careful about in her impersonation of the princess. She acknowledged his point, realizing the difficulty of not only speaking like the princess but also adopting her distinct personality, despite their physical resemblance. He then leaned in, explaining that if she could master one particular habit of the princess, she would never be caught. She listened intently as he began to reveal the princess's peculiar habit, wondering what such a crucial detail could be. The prince's words conjured vivid images of the true princess, who was intensely affectionate, constantly calling out his name with hearts in her eyes, eagerly anticipating their nights together and demanding his presence. Her passion was overwhelming, a burning heat she wished he would subside. Upon hearing this, she recoiled in shock, demanding to know if he truly expected her to publicly court him in such a manner. She exclaimed that the princess was truly abnormal. He, utterly drained, confessed that thanks to the princess's constant demands, he now suffered from neurosis, noting that she was even scarier at night. He then sarcastically commended himself for surviving until now, while she continued to complain about the princess's excessive affection. Still in the princess's form, she listened as the prince explained the mission. She needed to act like the princess and flirt with him in public. She immediately recoiled, declaring the mission impossible and that she was abandoning it. The prince, taken aback, questioned her resolve. Her frustration mounted as she internally questioned if this truly was the princess's dream, wondering if the tiara and dress were not enough, especially since her princess life had just begun. The prince, exasperated, urged her to try and say something loving, reminding her that this was merely an act and she shouldn't misunderstand the situation. She grumbled in response, still struggling with the task. He then shouted that she needed to put more emotion into her words, accusing her of enjoying the situation. She, flustered and blushing, stammered out a hesitant "love you." Suddenly, she snapped, pulling out a dagger and lunging at him, yelling that no one would fall for such a trash like him, and that the real princess was far more infatuated. He dodged, clearly shocked by her outburst. Moments later, under the pale moonlight, the assassin found herself buried in a deep hole, her disguise gone. From above, the prince's voice echoed, calling out her name repeatedly, each utterance laced with a strange, possessive affection. His hand, glowing faintly, reached down into the darkness, still calling her name with the same unsettling endearment. Covered in dirt, the assassin struggled to pull herself out of the hole, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and confusion. She finally managed to sit up within the confines of the pit, looking around with a bewildered expression, questioning her surroundings. She slowly regained consciousness, her mind clouded and body aching. Covered in dirt and what appeared to be blood, she struggled to recall the events that led to her injuries, her first thoughts consumed by the prince's whereabouts. Still disoriented, she found herself alone in a dark, foreboding forest. A wave of possessive anger washed over her as she questioned the prince's absence, accusing him of abandoning her and being with other women. Her anger flared, her eyes wide with a terrifying intensity as she imagined his betrayal, the unspoken threat of her wrath hanging heavy in the air. Meanwhile, the prince confronted her on a palace balcony, his tone calm but laced with manipulation. He asserted his control, reminding her that her very existence depended on him, and revealed his knowledge of her true identity, stating he was covering up the fact that she had killed the real princess. She reacted with a furious outburst, grabbing his shirt with a white-knuckled grip. Her face contorted in rage, she issued a chilling warning against any future betrayal, her possessive fury barely contained. Her rage escalated further as she held a knife to the throat of the terrified fairy assassin, declaring with chilling certainty that betrayal would be met with death, and that she would never forgive such an act. The former assassin, now unexpectedly a princess, stirred awake in a luxurious bed. Her expression was a mix of grogginess and a sly satisfaction, a stark contrast to her previous life of stealth and danger. She sat up, her long hair falling around her shoulders, and looked towards the grand window, a faint sense of wonder dawning upon her. The realization solidified. She was indeed the princess. Her eyes widened in a moment of pure, unadulterated joy at her new, opulent reality. She soon found herself on a balcony, giggling with delight at her newfound status. Meanwhile, a young man, a servant, approached her chamber, greeting her with a polite inquiry about her rest. Now fully adorned in a regal dress and a sparkling tiara, the princess leaned dramatically over the balcony, proclaiming her triumph in life and her absolute adoration for a pampered existence. The servant, witnessing her unrestrained exuberance, looked on with a mixture of surprise and concern. The servant, clearly exasperated, warned her to curb her recklessness and keep her voice down, fearing that someone might overhear her true nature. She responded with a slight frown, annoyed by his caution. She turned on him, her anger flaring as she declared that her assistance was born of necessity, not choice, and vehemently blamed him for the demise of the original princess. He recoiled slightly, taken aback by her fierce accusation. As she continued her indignant outburst, the servant, regaining his composure, remarked that her simple-minded enjoyment of playing the princess was, in a way, a relief. Her expression shifted from anger to a flustered, slightly embarrassed pout. Elsewhere in the grand residence, a maid yawned as she walked down a hallway, lamenting her late night spent engrossed in a mystery novel, a habit that often left her exhausted. She yawned, her eyes heavy with sleep, realizing she truly needed to go to bed early tonight. Moments later, she stood before a grand door, gently knocking and announcing, "Good morning, princess." As she opened the door, a gasp escaped her lips. Inside, the princess was sprawled atop the servant, her fist raised as if mid-punch, a furious expression on her face as she yelled. The maid, flustered by the unexpected sight, stammered that she understood they were close, but pleaded for them to avoid such intimate displays so early in the morning. The princess, however, was visibly annoyed by the maid's misinterpretation, muttering about the situation. She quickly clarified her position, asserting that it was not what it seemed. "Who's crazy enough to do it with this idiot anyway?" she thought, explaining aloud that she was on top of him for a completely different reason. The maid's eyes widened in confusion, a silent gasp escaping her as she pondered if she had misunderstood the entire situation. As the maid remained bewildered, the servant, still pinned beneath the princess, urgently whispered to her, warning that she needed to act properly, or the maid would surely discover their secret. The princess internally debated the instruction, questioning if she truly had to act lovey-dovey, like a real princess, but ultimately conceded that she did. With a sudden shift in demeanor, she turned to the maid, her cheeks flushed and a coy expression on her face. She asked for privacy, claiming she simply couldn't wait any longer, leaving the maid utterly bewildered by the abrupt change. The maid, still somewhat confused but seemingly accepting the princess's request, assured her that she would bring breakfast in a moment and advised them to take their time. The princess, meanwhile, maintained her intense, feigned expression, her eyes narrowed. As the door clicked shut, the servant, now free, let out a sigh of relief. He confirmed to the princess that the maid had not discovered their true intentions, pleased with their successful deception. He desperately tried to calm the princess, who was screaming in distress, declaring she could no longer endure the torture. As her outburst continued, the maid arrived, apologizing for the wait. The princess, still visibly agitated, announced her intention to go home, proclaiming she was at her limit. Moments later, a dramatic shift occurred. She was now happily devouring a meal, exclaiming how delicious it was and how being a princess was truly the best. The servant watched, a look of weary relief on his face. He let out a sigh of relief, asking if she felt better. She confirmed she did, secretly thinking that she would gladly kill the princess over and over again if it meant she could eat something so yummy, despite being the one who had already taken the princess's life. The servant then observed that maintaining their lovey-dovey act was proving to be a considerable pain. She, however, smugly countered that life as a princess was blissful. He warned her not to let her guard down, reminding her that they had only just managed to cover their tracks. She looked at him with a puzzled expression. She angrily retorted, telling him not to get cocky or she would kill him, complaining that the real princess was always pressing her chest against him. He defiantly declared he could do as he pleased. In a sudden fit of pique, she shoved him, sending him sprawling. Just then, the maid entered the room, gasping in surprise and offering to clean up their table. The princess let out a haughty laugh, while the maid, now on the floor, complained about having to endure such a display. The servant, flustered and blushing, called her an idiot and threatened to kill her, questioning if she was after his body too. The princess, feigning innocence, then asked if there wasn't somewhere they could be alone, prompting him to question her purpose. The princess, still maintaining the facade, walked arm in arm with the servant as they left the building. The maid, observing from a distance, cheerfully called out for them to be careful. As they walked, she felt a strange sensation, a racing in her chest, and wondered if the servant felt anything similar from their close proximity. He, however, seemed completely unaffected, leaving her to question why she was the only one experiencing such embarrassment and a racing heart. She felt foolish for it. He, for his part, reflected on the situation, finding it ironic that he once admired the princess, yet now he was forced into this absurd charade with her. She, growing increasingly frustrated by his lack of reaction and the suffocating closeness, demanded he get off her. He, in turn, reminded her that they were supposed to be a married couple, and she retorted that she had never experienced love before and was now basically pretending to be married. With a huff, she pulled away, leaving him to walk ahead as they continued their journey into a wooded area. As he walked, her thoughts turned dark, and she gripped a hidden knife, contemplating whether she should simply kill him. Meanwhile, he mused to himself, realizing that his previous unaffected demeanor was likely due to his deep-seated hatred for women, a sentiment he now understood was probably because of the princess herself. As they ventured deeper into the forest, she abruptly asked him where he had buried the princess. He looked at her, confused by the sudden, unsettling question. Moments later, they stood before a freshly dug, empty hole in the ground, a clear sign of a recent burial, leaving both of them stunned. He stared into the empty grave, his mind reeling from the impossible sight. Beside him, the princess wondered aloud if wild dogs had unearthed the body, her tone unsettlingly casual. The princess, her eyes wide with feigned shock, insisted that the buried one was unequivocally dead. Yet, he, still reeling from the discovery, could only stammer in disbelief, noting the complete absence of any remains and questioning if she could still be alive. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the forest. A figure emerged from the trees, a woman with long, light hair and a tattered dress, her eyes wide and unsettling. She called out to him, declaring she had found him, then expressed her loneliness and demanded comfort. The princess beside him watched, her expression shifting from feigned shock to genuine alarm. The newly appeared woman, her gaze fixed on the princess, questioned her identity and why she wore similar attire. Her smile was wide and unsettling, her eyes betraying a deep, possessive madness. The princess, now fully alert, stared back with a sharp, wary expression. As the tension mounted, the princess beside him smirked, confidently asserting her claim, "I'm the princess." The deranged woman, still in the background, watched with wide, unblinking eyes, her expression a mix of shock and confusion. The princess's smirk twisted into a menacing grin as she produced a hidden knife. She declared her intent to finish off her rival for good, expressing disbelief that the other woman was still alive. The deranged woman, seemingly oblivious to the immediate threat, continued to question the princess's motives, asking if she was after the prince. The princess, momentarily taken aback by the unexpected query, responded with a confused sound. Without warning, the deranged woman lunged forward, her eyes wide with a terrifying possessiveness as she shrieked that, "The prince is mine." Her sudden, violent outburst caught the servant off guard, while the princess braced herself for the impending attack. The deranged woman moved with astonishing speed, her tattered dress and long hair swirling around her as she struck. The princess barely managed to dodge the furious assault, while the servant could only watch, frozen in disbelief, as the two women clashed. The princess, having narrowly avoided the blow, acknowledged her opponent's incredible speed, realizing this was far beyond what a mere princess should be capable of. Despite the surprise, she tightened her grip on her knife, preparing to meet the deranged woman's next move with her own counterattack. She screamed, her eyes wide with terror, as the deranged princess lunged, a sharp object piercing her chest. The attack was swift and brutal, leaving the current princess reeling from the unexpected ferocity. Moments later, the servant stared in disbelief at the scene. The deranged princess lay motionless on the ground, a grievous wound visible on her body. He wondered if she was truly dead, acknowledging the fatal nature of the injury. He looked on, startled, as the current princess approached the fallen figure. She expressed her exasperation, lamenting that she would have to bury the deranged princess once more. However, the deranged princess, despite her wounds, slowly rose. She declared that she felt no pain, nor did she feel sleepy, noting that everything had been strange since she awoke. Meanwhile, the servant held the current princess protectively. As the deranged princess continued to stand, the current princess, held by the servant, questioned her identity, stating that the figure before them looked more like a monster than a princess. Unseen by them, the deranged princess subtly drew a small knife from her tattered dress. With a chillingly wide, deranged smile, the deranged princess clutched the knife to her chest. She complained of the cold, demanding that someone hurry and warm her up with their body, her eyes fixed on the servant as she whispered his perceived title, Prince. The princess, now in a simple dress, stood before the prince, claiming she felt no pain and no need for sleep. Yet, she shivered, admitting to a profound cold and pleading for him to warm her in his arms. The prince watched her with a wary expression. She then leaned in, her wide eyes fixed on him, intensely pleading for him to grant her request, calling him my prince with desperate urgency. His terror was palpable as he screamed, declaring he never wanted to return to that life. The princess, now wearing a tiara, sternly commanded him to calm down. She then pointed at him, demanding to know why he was even alive in the first place, stating she had many questions for him. Meanwhile, the princess in her tattered attire appeared confused, attempting to articulate her purpose, perhaps to enjoy life to the fullest, but quickly corrected herself, realizing that wasn't what she truly meant. Her counterpart, the princess in the tiara, confronted him directly, reminding him that she had stabbed him with a knife and that he had died just last night. She demanded an explanation for his inexplicable survival. He, however, averted his gaze, admitting he was not good with complicated matters. The princess in the tiara continued to press him, asserting that his ability to survive such an attack was not something a mere princess should be capable of, and recalling his own attack on her. The distressed, tattered princess looked on. Yet, the princess in her tattered state, holding a knife to her own throat, declared with wide, determined eyes that she had no time to remain dead, for all she truly desired was to be loved by the prince. She stood, startled, as the prince approached, expressing his relief that she was safe. He called out to her, "A princess." Her initial shock quickly turned to an almost manic joy as she recognized him. He explained that they had been searching for her since yesterday, asking where she had been. However, her joy was short-lived, or perhaps a facade, as she suddenly lunged at him, a small knife glinting in her hand, attempting to stab him. Despite the attack, she then embraced him tightly, declaring her happiness that he had come to pick her up and lamenting her loneliness. Meanwhile, another princess-like figure, dressed in a more formal gown, appeared, instructing the prince that it was time to return to the castle for comfort. As the new princess spoke, she turned her gaze to the first princess, accusing her of being the assassin from before and warning the prince that she would not forgive betrayal. The prince, caught between them, looked utterly bewildered. Both princesses then clung to him, one on each side, each demanding answers. The first princess questioned if he had forgotten their nightly reaffirmations of love, while the second reminded him of his oath not to betray her. They both vehemently demanded that he make it clear which of them he truly loved, their faces contorted in desperate frustration. Overwhelmed by their insistence, the prince's mind drifted, recalling a memory of the first princess, who had repeatedly called his name with an almost obsessive affection. In that memory, she sat contentedly, delicately eating something with a small fork, while he watched her, a cup in his hand. He seemed to struggle with an unspoken thought, his expression troubled, before the memory shifted back to him observing her in that quiet moment. He cried out in pain as the princess squeezed him tightly, her grip firm. Beside them, the other princess watched, her eyes wide with shock. Still caught in the princess's embrace, he sweated nervously as she pressed him, asking if he would choose her or the monster princess. The other princess, her expression hardening, warned him of the consequences if he went against her, reminding him that she was an assassin. With a sharp tch, the other princess lunged forward, her anger erupting. She furiously demanded the first princess get away from him, pushing her back with a powerful blow. She continued her assault, delivering a forceful kick that sent him sprawling to the ground. Standing over his fallen form, she declared that he still needed more discipline, while the first princess looked on, stunned. As she stood victorious, her thoughts drifted to a time when she believed the lavish life of a princess, with ornate beds, rich meals, and vividly colored dresses, had nothing to do with her. To her, those were mere fairy tales, a life taken for granted since birth, a life she now vowed to seize, even if it meant killing to take the place of the real princess. Back in the present, she stood defiantly on him, proclaiming she would not yield. That was why, she asserted, she would erase the other princess completely and take everything for herself, for the true princess was her. The first princess, her face contorted in a furious scream, demanded to know what the other princess thought she was doing. She roared for her to lower her foot, asserting that only she was allowed to step on it. Her mind, too, drifted to a past memory. She sat in a forest, casually remarking that being a princess was so lame. Both princesses, in their respective pasts, reflected on the burdens of their roles. One thought of being bound by rules and used by others, while the other considered the forced expectations, realizing that even a smile could be just an act. Back in the present, the other princess recoiled, a sharp tch, escaping her lips as she realized the gravity of the situation. This was bad, she thought, admitting she had no plan. Her gaze fell upon the first princess, now revealed as an immortal monster, and she wondered how one could possibly fight such a foe. She found her existence suffocating and dull, a life of constant protection, control, and restriction where nothing brought joy. That was why the prince became her sole possession, the one who had appeared in her otherwise boring world. Now, back in the present, her eyes wide with a manic intensity, she declared she would not hand him over, even if it meant her own demise, as flames erupted around her hand. The flames around her surged with an agonizing intensity, causing her to cry out, while the other princess watched, startled by the sudden, powerful display. The sheer force of the fiery outburst sent all three sprawling to the ground, each crying out in shock and pain. As they lay there, the other princess demanded to know if she would truly go so far as to use fire, while the monster princess, still on the ground, desperately called for help. The prince, nearby, seemed utterly bewildered by the unfolding chaos. A moment of quiet confusion settled over the forest. Returning to the scene, the other princess admitted she had saved her on impulse, then wondered aloud if she should have simply let her burn. The prince, observing the monster princess, confirmed that she indeed seemed to burn in direct sunlight. The other princess then voiced her concern, stating that if anyone discovered the princess was a monster, it would undoubtedly lead to chaos. He agreed, concluding that with her current body, she could not possibly return to the castle. With a stern gaze, the other princess addressed the fallen monster princess, offering a grim mercy. If she lived quietly in exile, she would be spared. She then delivered a chilling reminder that fire would kill her. She cried out a desperate no, as Princess 2, now adorned with a tiara, declared her intention to usurp Princess 1's position and claim a life of luxury and peace for herself. Still distraught and in her tattered attire, she pleaded with the prince, her eyes wide with fear, asking if he would abandon her once more. The prince, however, remained silent, his expression conflicted. He then spoke, his voice firm, stating that Princess 1 had been deceived by Princess 2. He vowed to wake her up and deliver a sweet punishment to the impostor, his hand reaching out decisively. In a sudden burst of manic rage, Princess 1 shrieked, declaring her intent to slice Princess 2 to pieces and kill her. As her fury erupted, Princess 2 and the prince stood back to back, their expressions grim and determined, ready to face the impending confrontation. Princess 2 urgently commanded the prince to run to the castle, warning him that the monster would soon attack with full force. He questioned if escape was even possible, as Princess 1 hunched menacingly in the background. Still fleeing, Princess 2 shouted that Princess 1 would burn if she pursued them, urging the prince to head towards the sunlight and assuring him they would be safe. Princess 1 watched from the deep shadows of the forest as Princess 2 and the prince ran, their figures receding towards the distant light. Left alone once more, she collapsed to the ground, her voice a whisper as she questioned why and lamented being abandoned in the forest again. However, her despair quickly twisted into a manic grin as she looked up at the sky, deciding that the fun could simply wait until nightfall. The grand doors of a formidable castle slammed shut, echoing the frantic arrival of the prince and Princess 2, who had just escaped the forest. Inside the castle, the prince, still catching his breath from their hurried escape, expressed his disbelief that Princess 1 was still alive. Princess 2, standing nearby, questioned what they would do about the monster, noting that she was practically immortal. She stressed the immediate danger, declaring that 2 princesses in the castle would only cause chaos. Even if sunlight burned Princess 1, she would undoubtedly attack again by nightfall, demanding they resolve the situation by tonight. As they discussed their predicament, a maid approached them, offering a cheerful welcome back. She quickly noticed their disheveled state and that they were both out of breath, asking what was wrong. She further observed that both of them were sweating profusely and their clothes were disheveled. The maid, clearly misunderstanding the situation, became flustered, pleading with them not to lump her in with that horny princess and to restrain themselves, even if they felt free outside. Princess 2, seemingly amused by the maid's reaction, then mischievously suggested to the prince that they continue what they had started earlier in his room, leaving the maid utterly shocked. The maid watched in disbelief as the prince struggled to hold Princess 2 back, who was now squirming and sweating profusely. He admitted he could not hold back any longer, prompting the maid to ask if he was all right. As the prince and the maid looked on, confused by the escalating situation, Princess 2 collapsed to the floor, sweating and distressed. She muttered that something was missing, a strange feeling unlike her usual self. The maid observed Princess 2 closely, noting that she seemed like a completely different person today. She realized that the usual princess would have, but the thought trailed off, leaving the true nature of Princess 2's change a mystery. She continued to cling to the prince, declaring her immense love for him and insisting that she was acting the same as always. However, the prince, clearly uncomfortable, felt that something's definitely off about her behavior. Still held tightly by the princess, the prince reacted with shock when the maid interjected, questioning why they hadn't kissed yet. The maid then declared that today, a kiss was in order, leaving both the prince and Princess 2 looking stunned. In a grand hallway, the maid observes the prince and princess in a close embrace. She questions what they just said, her expression serious, startling the couple. She repeats her question, asking if they had not heard her. The princess, still in the prince's arms, reacts with wide, shocked eyes, exclaiming that she hasn't done it yet and demanding to know what the maid means. The maid leans in, a finger to her lips, her eyes wide and intense as she declares her deduction. They have not kissed. The princess recoils in horror at the mention of a kiss, especially in public, while the prince appears equally flustered. The maid, unfazed, asks what they are talking about. The maid points out that if anyone was engaging in public displays of affection, it was the princess, as other onlookers are shown reacting to the couple's embrace. The princess groans in exasperation. The princess vehemently argues that flirting is fundamentally different from kissing, which she insists is on an entirely different level of intimacy. The prince remains visibly distressed. She continues her impassioned argument, asserting that a kiss is merely skin touching skin, or just mucous membranes. She then accuses the prince of having become desensitized to such things because of her. The princess clutches the prince, her face contorted in frustration and embarrassment. She laments being the only one feeling such intense shame, concluding that the prince's understanding of intimacy has been irrevocably skewed by that horny princess. She recoiled from the prince, her face a mask of embarrassment and panic, as the maid observed, remarking that such behavior was uncharacteristic and suspicious, questioning why she couldn't simply kiss him. The prince, exasperated, reluctantly agreed to proceed, though he seemed hesitant. The maid, meanwhile, stared in disbelief, questioning if this was truly the princess. Despite her initial reluctance, the princess, with a flushed face, declared she would not run away, but admitted she did not know how to kiss, instructing the prince to take the lead. As the prince hesitated, she impatiently urged him to act, then quickly apologized after he voiced a brief protest. He pushed her away, exclaiming in frustration that it was always the other princess who initiated their kisses. The maid, witnessing the failed attempt, became even more convinced, declaring that a true princess would never behave in such a manner. She pointed an accusing finger, asserting that the princess's inability to kiss proved her deduction was correct. This individual was not the real princess. In a sudden move, the princess embraced the prince tightly, her back to the maid, who watched with wide-eyed surprise. Their faces drew incredibly close, the princess's eyes shadowed, as the maid gasped in shock. The prince, still in the princess's embrace, glanced at the maid and asked if she was still present, to which she could only utter a surprised, drawn-out sound. The princess, with a mischievous, flushed expression, confessed that she simply couldn't hold back her overflowing desire any longer. As the prince and princess walked away, the princess clinging to his arm, the maid was left behind, bewildered. She offered a hesitant apology, pondering if only that perverted princess could act in such a way, and began to question if her earlier deduction had been wrong after all. She considered her deduction. If this were a mystery novel, the true princess would have been eliminated, and a cunning impostor would have taken her place. With that thought, she fled down the long corridor, leaving the prince and the other princess behind, both looking utterly bewildered. He remained frozen, a single, affectionate thought of him echoing in the princess's mind. Moments later, the prince found himself carrying her, as she shyly explained that her torn clothes were embarrassing and suggested they return to their room. He could only offer a hesitant agreement. He continued to ponder the situation, questioning what was truly happening and if her sudden, dramatic shift in attitude, seemingly triggered by a kiss, was nothing more than an elaborate act. They eventually arrived back in a room, the prince still looking confused as she clung to him. Suddenly, with an unexpected burst of strength, she shoved him away, sending him reeling. The prince flew through the air, propelled across the room by her forceful push. He landed hard on a nearby bed, crying out in pain, as she stood over him, declaring with an odd intensity that it was her first time. Still recovering from the impact, he accused her of being worse than an assassin, utterly heartless. Yet, she merely mused that for an assassin, he was surprisingly delicate. She lay on the bed, her face flushed, while he urged her to show a little sympathy, reminding her they were in this together. But she suddenly sat up, accusing him of being the absolute worst, despite his attempt to explain that she had done it softer than the real princess. Even as she buried her face in the bed once more, she pondered if this was truly what an assassin was like, unable to sense any killing intent or threat from him. He simply watched her, perplexed. Her thoughts quickly turned to a fierce warning, her eyes wide with a manic intensity as she threatened to torture and kill him if he even considered betraying her after all this. He visibly sweated, intimidated by her outburst. With a sudden shift in demeanor, she declared that this time they would surely kill her, referring to the monster princess, and stated they had until sunrise to end this. He stood, startled by her pronouncements. She then turned her attention back to him, questioning if he missed his old partner, though she quickly added that it didn't matter to her, and asked if his heart ached. He, however, was thinking that she was a finer woman, though he quickly denied it when she pressed him. Her eyes widened in shock, and a deep blush spread across her face, clearly flustered by his unspoken sentiment. She wondered about his reaction, while he, too, found himself inexplicably blushing. As he began to walk away, she called out, asking if he meant they would bathe together. He simply stated he was going to the bath, needing to cool his head. He peered around the corner, observing Princess Tu's exuberant outburst. She loudly declared her joy at finally having some alone time, shouting her excitement. He quickly clarified, however, that the baths were separate. Unperturbed, she continued her stroll through the opulent hallway, humming a cheerful tune. She mused that there was still ample time before sunset, and she intended to savor this peaceful luxury for as long as possible. Still lost in thought, she considered how thankful she ought to be. It remained difficult for her to fully grasp that a mere assassin, such as herself, was now living the life of a princess, a situation that felt entirely like a fairy tale. Her gratitude extended to the unseen forces that had brought her to this point. She vowed that she owed a debt to whoever was out there, somewhere, and especially to the one who had ordered the princess's assassination. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Prince One was consumed by a furious frustration. He clenched his fist tightly, his face contorted in anger as he questioned why the princess was still alive when she was supposed to be dead. He cursed the turn of events. His body ached, and he realized he could not endure much longer in his current state. He knew he had to take action, fearing that if the situation persisted, she would undoubtedly kill him. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky with hues of twilight and casting long shadows across the castle, the urgency of his predicament intensified. He had to act before nightfall. Inside the grand bathhouse, Maid One, with her short dark hair, stepped into the warm, inviting water. A look of serene contentment graced her features as she began to wash herself. She sighed in blissful relaxation, internally noting that this was the most peaceful time of day, particularly with no princess nearby. She found the sensation incredibly pleasant. Suddenly, her eyes widened in surprise, her peaceful moment abruptly interrupted by an unseen event, as she let out a startled cry of "Yahoo-oh-oh." She screamed in terror as Princess One, completely naked and shrieking with manic delight, burst through the doorway, running wildly into the bathing chamber. Her wild dash ended abruptly as she slipped on the wet floor, tumbling headfirst into the bathwater with a loud splash, while Maid One continued to shriek in utter shock. The princess and her maid found themselves sharing a bath, the princess looking flustered and the maid appearing startled by her presence. The princess quickly apologized, acknowledging she had startled her maid, but expressed relief that neither of them had been hurt. Despite the princess's protest that she could wash herself, the maid insisted it was her duty to assist, diligently scrubbing the princess's back. When the princess attempted to return the gesture by washing the maid's feet, the maid firmly refused, stating it was improper and that it would be the princess's turn to be washed next. As the maid continued her duties, the princess observed her, realizing the maid was likely around her own age. She reflected on her solitary life, having only ever trained for killing and never experiencing the companionship of friends. Her thoughts continued, concluding that an assassin like herself would never have close friends anyway, especially now that her only friends were already gone. Later, the princess sat alone outside, looking dejected and lost in thought, while two small rodents scurried nearby, seemingly oblivious to her despair. She gently picked up the two creatures, bestowing upon them the names Drizella and Anastasia, and declared them her new friends. She found their small forms endearing and wondered if their simple presence was an attempt to comfort her. Holding her new companions, the princess felt a strange sense of reassurance and vitality. It was an odd sensation, she mused, to feel so alive and comforted by such small company, realizing this must be what friendship truly felt like. She was still in the bath, her mind drifting to her new companions, Anastasia and Drizella, when a sudden pang of hunger struck her. Observing her, the maid cautiously inquired if something was amiss. The princess quickly wiped her mouth, dismissing it as something in her eye, though the maid suspected she had been drooling. Despite her denial, the princess leaned in with a wide, unsettling grin, causing the maid to recoil slightly. The maid's internal thoughts confirmed her suspicion. The princess had indeed been drooling, seemingly at her body. The princess then envisioned a different life, one where she sat with her maid and another princess, not as an assassin, but as a true princess, capable of making real friends. This fantasy overwhelmed her with joy, and she erupted in an exaggerated display of happiness, proclaiming her desire for real human friends, while drooling once more into the bathwater. The maid, growing increasingly uncomfortable with the princess's intensity, attempted to clarify their current situation, reminding her that despite their roles, they were simply two naked women in a bath. The princess, however, remained largely obscured by foam. Undeterred, the princess reached out and grasped the maid, her expression intense as she declared her wish to form an even closer bond, a statement that filled the maid with terror. Overwhelmed, the maid shrieked and scrambled away, protesting that someone like her was unworthy and that the entire situation felt utterly bizarre. Later, sitting alone in the bath, the maid reflected on the princess's consistently strange behavior. A persistent, unsettling feeling lingered, suggesting that something was fundamentally amiss, a thought she could not shake. She continued to ponder the unsettling possibility. Was the princess truly who she claimed to be, or was she an impostor? The maid felt a strong urge to confirm her suspicions, yet a chilling fear gripped her, knowing that confronting such a powerful figure could lead to her own demise. Still in the bath, she wrestled with her suspicions. If the princess was truly an impostor, the maid knew she had a duty to expose her, for everyone else would be in grave danger. The princess, meanwhile, sat nearby, seemingly oblivious. Suddenly, the princess turned to her, asking if she remembered her name. The maid, caught off guard, could only stammer, "My name?" She felt a surge of panic, wondering if this was a trick question, a riddle, or if she herself was now under suspicion. Her mind raced, trying to comprehend the sudden inquiry. The princess pressed on, insisting that the maid knew her name, her wide eyes fixed on her. The maid could only manage a series of hesitant, drawn-out sounds, unable to form a coherent answer. Elsewhere in the castle, the prince sat by a window, observing the sudden downpour outside. He noted the heavy rain, a stark contrast to the earlier calm. He worried about the princess, hoping she wouldn't slip in the bath. A frown creased his brow as he realized she had been in there for an unusually long time. Meanwhile, another princess stood by a window, gazing out at the stormy night. She confessed to herself that she was too anxious to sleep and declared her intent to get rid of the princess soon. Back in the bath, the tense silence between the maid and the princess stretched on, punctuated only by the sound of the falling rain. The princess's face contorted in a sudden, sharp realization, her eyes wide with distress. The maid finally forced a nervous laugh, attempting to cover her failure by claiming, "Of course I know your name. I'm the princess, after all." But the princess's pained expression confirmed the maid's answer was far from correct. She felt a surge of relief, realizing she had overheard the prince mention the maid's name just in time. The prince, meanwhile, seemed about to introduce the girl. Moments later, in the bath, the maid expressed her gratitude. The princess, holding a scrubbing brush, invited her closer, offering to wash her back. As they continued their bath, the princess playfully splashed water over the maid, seemingly enjoying their shared moment. After their bath, the princess, now dressed and wearing her tiara, hummed contentedly while the maid, also dressed, watched her from a distance. She beamed, declaring the experience incredibly fulfilling and expressing her desire for them to get along from that moment forward. The princess continued to look pleased, while the maid reacted with a look of utter bewilderment and shock. She then confidently asserted that they were practically best friends already, feeling they had grown much closer that day. Yet, the maid's internal thoughts revealed a stark contrast to the princess's perception. She realized the princess had never shown the slightest interest in her, and the true princess wouldn't even know her name. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the castle, the prince noticed the sudden darkening of the sky and the rumble of thunder. He stood by a window, a look of concern on his face, as he confessed to himself that he was getting a really bad feeling. He recoiled in utter shock, his eyes wide with disbelief, as the princess, clad in her revealing undergarments, peered through the window, her gaze unsettlingly intense. Moments later, she burst into the room, apologizing for the delay but immediately demanding that he make it up to her, especially since he had also kept her waiting. Her manic grin and revealing attire only intensified his alarm. The maid looked out the window, a growing suspicion forming in her mind. She wondered if the princess she served was, in fact, a fake. She observed the princess interacting with the prince, noting the princess's complete lack of interest in him and her apparent ignorance of his very name. This observation solidified a lingering unease within her. Yet, despite her conviction, a part of her still hesitated. Her eyes, trained by countless detective novels, could not be deceived, and she felt certain there was no mistake in her assessment. Meanwhile, the princess, in her more revealing attire, displayed a range of emotions, from excited delight to a sudden, wide-eyed surprise. Suddenly, she found herself unexpectedly close to the princess, the distance between them having shrunk in an instant, leaving her startled. The maid shook her head, a conflict brewing within her as she pondered which princess she truly preferred. Still, she looked out the window, realizing the prince remained completely oblivious to the unfolding situation. She felt a strong urge to inform him of her suspicions. Unaware of the maid's internal struggle, the princess expressed her joy at having made her first friend and found that being a princess was actually quite fun. She skipped away happily, humming a tune. She pondered the precariousness of her situation, knowing that if her true identity as an assassin were ever discovered, her newfound life would shatter. Her thoughts were interrupted by a terrifying imagined scenario. The maid, upon learning the truth, would scream in horror, denouncing her as a lustful beast, a pervert, human trash, and a killer. The imagined outburst filled her with dread, a cold sweat beading on her brow. She realized the maid was her very first friend, and she resolved to avoid such a revelation at all costs. Meanwhile, the maid, still grappling with her suspicions, observed a disturbing scene through a window. The prince lay on the ground, while the princess leaned over him, whispering his name and declaring that they were just getting started. The prince pleaded for forgiveness, unable to resist, as the maid watched with a sinister, knowing chuckle. Her mind conjured a terrifying image of the princess's true, vengeful nature, imagining her crying out, "I won't. You betrayed me. You'll repay every bit of it." Suddenly, a piercing scream echoed through the palace, a sound that was undeniably real. Elsewhere, the other princess, Princess_2, heard the distant shriek and wondered if it was the princess screaming. She quickly dismissed the thought, questioning if it could be the monster princess instead. She rushed to a window, peering out at the unusually dark, rainy sky. It was not even noon, yet the gloom was profound. She cursed the weather, realizing that with such conditions, the monster princess could not be harmed by sunlight. Just then, a desperate cry for help emanated from behind a nearby door, confirming her growing fear. The prince was in danger. Without hesitation, she pounded on the door, demanding to know what had happened and if the prince was all right. She stood before the locked door, the prince's desperate screams echoing from within. "Gaia, stop," he pleaded, his voice filled with terror. No, I can't do this anymore. If this keeps going, I'll die. Please." From the other side, the first princess's chilling laughter resonated, declaring, "Oh ho 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 ho. We're far from finished." Her mind raced, recalling the first princess's unsettling words from earlier. "Your crying face is so adorable, and the perverse encouragement, you'll be fine. If anyone can do it, it's you." The prince's cries of "no, no, and no, I'm at my limit," only intensified her alarm. She listened intently, the sounds from beyond the door continuing to paint a grim picture, confirming her worst fears. He weakly mumbled that he was dying, prompting her to exclaim in disbelief. She already did it 8 times. "You've got some serious stamina." She urgently asked if he was still breathing, her concern evident. Meanwhile, the first princess, oblivious to the other's distress, sat nearby, a blissful smile on her face. She murmured contentedly, "I finally got to taste it again." Her soft laughter echoing in the room. She felt an incredible surge of energy, a fire ignited within her. "I feel amazing," she thought, convinced this was the very power of love. Her gaze then sharpened, fixing on the prince and the other princess. Without warning, she launched a powerful kick, aiming directly for the other princess, who was still tending to the injured prince. The blow sent the second princess hurtling across the room, slamming into the wall with a sickening thud. The first princess stared at her own hand, bewildered, questioning if she had truly done that, almost denying the immense power she had just unleashed. The prince, horrified, rushed to the fallen princess, urgently asking if she was all right. She, in turn, could only gasp, wondering if the attack was meant to kill her. Lying injured, the second princess realized the terrifying truth. The first princess's speed and murderous intent were on an entirely different level compared to her daytime demeanor. Meanwhile, the first princess herself lay dazed, groaning in confusion, seemingly unaware of the full extent of her own actions. She was consumed by terror, her mind racing with the horrifying thought that if this continued, the immortal monster would surely torture them all to death. Despite her fear, she still felt a surge of power, a sensation that filled her heart as she declared her absolute need for the prince. Meanwhile, Princess_2, still recovering on the floor, heard a voice inquire if she had enjoyed her dream, a question that seemed to mock her earlier attempts to intervene between the prince and Princess_1. Princess_2, regaining some composure, asserted that a true princess should exhibit more refinement. Princess_1, however, her eyes wide and manic, retorted that she would send Princess_2 away with her little dream, even if it meant taking her life. Just as Princess_1 moved to strike, the prince lunged forward, shouting for her to stop and not touch Princess_2, who also cried out a warning. Princess_1, her face contorted in a furious snarl, demanded to know why he would protect that woman. He then turned to Princess_2, explaining the dire need for someone to fulfill the role of princess, as the kingdom would undoubtedly descend into chaos without one. He questioned the very notion of a princess who would ignite under sunlight, a clear reference to Princess_1's peculiar vulnerability. Princess_1, still dazed and looking utterly distraught, could only manage to ask if they were telling her to leave. The prince, his expression firm, refused to allow Princess_2 to take his body, but insisted that Princess_1 must remain the princess, regardless of the circumstances. Suddenly, Maid_1 burst through a door, delivering shocking news to the prince. The princess was a fake. She quickly added, however, that as long as no one discovered the truth and the secret remained contained, everything would be fine. As the prince processed the maid's shocking revelation, a sudden crash erupted from the adjacent room. The maid, having burst through a wall, urgently warned that an assassin, disguised as the princess, was loose in the castle. The supposed princess, caught off guard, looked on in surprise. The princess's eyes narrowed, a cold realization dawning upon her. She cursed inwardly, understanding that her true identity had been discovered, and knew she had to silence the maid. Moments later, the maid held the princess firmly, her expression unreadable as she questioned if she truly needed to eliminate her. The princess, now visibly distressed, could only stare back in fear. A wave of terror washed over the princess's face, her wide eyes reflecting pure panic at the maid's implied threat. Just then, the prince entered the room, his attention immediately drawn to the commotion. The maid pointed accusingly at the princess, reiterating her claim that this person was an assassin disguised as royalty. She continued, explaining that while the princess's disguise might have fooled the prince, she herself was not so easily deceived, acknowledging the brilliance of the deception. The prince, now fully grasping the gravity of the situation, confronted the terrified princess, declaring her a fake and demanding her immediate surrender. Overwhelmed by panic, the princess shrieked, her eyes wide with desperation as she lunged forward, realizing that since her true identity was known, she had no choice but to silence the maid. The maid, in turn, recoiled and pointed, denouncing her as a monster. A scene of utter chaos unfolded as the young man stood aghast, sweat beading on his brow, while the maid behind him recoiled in shock. Before them, a figure with long, light hair, adorned with a small crown, sat slumped on the floor, her face hidden, revealing a delicate, ruffled dress. The maid, her eyes wide with disbelief, demanded to know what was truly happening, questioning the prince directly. The young man, still visibly flustered, could only stammer a vague, uncertain response. She pressed further, her voice rising in accusation, asking if the prince had known all along that he was with a fake. Her gaze was sharp, demanding answers about the true nature of the situation. Her anger then turned towards the figure on the floor, as she pointed a finger and vehemently demanded to know the identity of the person before them. The figure on the floor, the supposed princess, finally looked up, her expression grim and a faint mark of blood near her mouth. She acknowledged that her true identity had been exposed, stating it was merely a revelation of the truth. She then declared, with a chilling calm, that she was no princess, but an assassin. Therefore, she concluded, resolving the current predicament would be simple. The maid, her eyes widening further in horror, understood the implication of the assassin's words. She realized the assassin meant to silence them, to simply kill them to prevent the truth from spreading. A cold, calculating thought emerged, acknowledging the brief, nascent friendship that had just formed. Yet, it quickly dismissed such sentiment, concluding that eliminating a mere girl would be an easy task. The assassin's face hardened, her eyes narrowing with fierce resolve. She decided she must kill them, especially the monster princess, to secure her position. Her gaze dropped, focusing on her own form, as she considered what she needed to do to maintain her facade and remain a princess. Her resolve hardened, a silent vow forming in her mind. First, this girl. Yet, despite her hardened resolve, she found herself unable to act, collapsing to the floor in despair. Damn it, how pathetic. I'm an assassin, yet I can't even muster the strength. Meanwhile, the maid, witnessing the princess's distress, demanded an explanation, her voice filled with alarm. The young man, the prince, watched with wide, concerned eyes. The princess, still on the floor, looked up at the prince and asked if he was worried about this truth being exposed. She continued her charge, her smile unwavering, assuring the terrified maid that she would send her to hell without suffering. The maid could only stare in disbelief. With a powerful kick, the princess sent the maid flying, her body crashing against the door. The prince watched, utterly shocked by the sudden, brutal assault. As the maid lay stunned, the princess loomed over her, demanding to know why she was interfering. She reminded the maid that she was the one who had been serving her. The maid, still reeling, could only stammer a question, while the prince, now enraged, demanded to know what was happening. The princess, however, simply stated that she had no interest in anyone other than the prince. She reasoned internally that their interests aligned, as her death and her false identity would be exposed if everyone knew, and she could not continue to deceive them. She declared that there was no guarantee the maid would keep silent, and even if she could be silenced, there was still the possibility she might seek help. Therefore, it would be better to eliminate her for everyone's sake. She then turned to the prince, asking if he didn't agree with her reasoning. He remained silent, his face shadowed with dread. His dread turned to a desperate cry as he called out the maid's name, his eyes wide with horror. As he cried out, the princess, with a furious expression, lunged forward, her hand reaching for the maid. The prince instinctively tried to intervene, questioning her actions. He confronted her, demanding to know if she still intended to pretend to be the princess. He declared that he would not be deceived by such an impostor, asserting that her actions were those of a fake. She looked back at him, surprised by his direct accusation. She averted her gaze, a blush creeping onto her cheeks, and mumbled that it was because he was her first friend. Confused by her quiet confession, he leaned in, asking her to repeat what she had said, as her voice had been too soft to understand. Suddenly, her demeanor shifted back to menacing. She crouched low, declaring that if he insisted on pushing her this far, she had no choice but to eliminate the maid. As she prepared to strike, the prince threw himself in front of the maid, shielding her. He defiantly declared that the maid was not just anyone. She was his only friend, Ariel. The princess paused, considering his words, then asked if that was his final wish. Without waiting for a reply, she lunged forward, a chilling smile on her face, telling him to sleep well as she struck. The prince watched in shock as her attack came. The princess, still enraged, continued her assault. Her target, the maid Ariel, cowered beneath the prince's protective embrace as he shielded her from the furious blows. Despite his efforts, her relentless attack pressed down upon him, her hands gripping his arm with surprising strength as he struggled to maintain his defensive posture. She snarled, questioning how he could endure such pain, even if he were a powerful monster, remarking that his current position must be agonizing. Moments later, the princess looked down at the maid, who remained huddled on the floor. The prince, now speaking, declared that he would become strong enough to protect her. His words echoed as he was suddenly seen bound by heavy chains, a large wooden block shackling his arm. He cried out, demanding to know why he was being restrained, while the princess watched, visibly shocked by the turn of events. A sudden commotion erupted as the princess found herself bound, her eyes wide with surprise and a hint of indignation. The young man beside her, equally startled, could only utter a confused exclamation, while the maid looked on with a mixture of shock and concern. Still tied up and lying on the floor, the princess complained about the situation, noting that while it was her first time being bound, the technique seemed practiced. The young man, looking down at her, asked if she was all right, while the maid pondered the implications of someone being tied up. Later, as rain lashed against the castle walls, the princess and the maid sat in a somber discussion. The princess began to explain a grave matter, stating that the prince had killed her. She elaborated on the intricate plan. To conceal her death, she had been resurrected as a monster. However, this new form carried a severe drawback. The monster would burn if exposed to sunlight. The princess continued, her voice filled with frustration, explaining that because of this limitation, she could no longer properly fulfill her duties. Therefore, she needed a proxy to assume her role, and she also expressed a desire to eliminate the monster she had become. Her expression suddenly hardened as she clutched a small box, suggesting that perhaps she should dispose of the maid first. She saw no reason to assist an enemy. The young man, his eyes wide with alarm, quickly interjected, urging them to wait. He argued that it was not right to solve problems by killing someone. Ignoring his plea, the princess pointed an accusing finger at the maid, declaring that she was the one who had killed her. The maid, sitting dejectedly, confirmed the accusation, admitting it was true. The princess stared at the maid, her initial surprise quickly turning into a look of shock and disbelief at the maid's confession. The maid, however, rose with a newfound resolve, offering her cooperation. She vowed to keep the secret, emphasizing that a proxy for the princess was essential and that revealing the truth would only cause chaos. For the sake of the kingdom, she insisted, the deception must continue. She looked at the princess, who questioned her resolve, asking if she was truly certain about taking on the burden of being Ariel. The maid affirmed her commitment. Despite the princess's worried expression, she smiled brightly, declaring that if everything were exposed, she would protect her friend, even if it cost her life. She would not overlook anyone who tried to harm her. Moments later, a sudden noise startled both the princess and the young man, who was now bound in a wooden stock. He cried out, asking if they could truly trust the prince. The princess, still holding him, seemed to be trying to calm him, while he, despite his predicament, declared that he would do anything if it was for her sake. She held the maid close, her expression stern as she internally grappled with the situation. She knew the young man was a scoundrel, but she also understood that she, as the monster princess, needed to change her attitude. As the princess considered her options, the young man, still on the floor, offered his own body as a substitute. She then turned her attention back to the maid, telling her to get away, calling her clumsy, yet acknowledging that the maid had tried to help her. Later, under the cover of a rainy night, The maid, now cloaked and hooded, stood alone on a palace balcony, gazing out into the downpour. She clutched a pickaxe firmly in her hand, her face obscured by the hood, her posture resolute. With a determined stride, she emerged from a doorway, the pickaxe held ready, as a blinding flash of light erupted from the side, illuminating her path. A fierce young woman, her dark hair pulled back, gripped a pickaxe tightly, her face contorted in a snarl. She muttered about the princess's annoying secrets, declaring her intent to kill both the princess and the prince. Her furious strike had shattered a wooden block, the pieces scattering on the ground. The princess, witnessing the destruction, recoiled in wide-eyed shock. Still reeling from the sudden violence, the princess clung desperately to the young man, who lay prone on the floor, calling him her prince, as if seeking comfort in the illusion. Meanwhile, the maid, now dressed in a dark, practical garment, questioned the princess about the safety of removing her disguise, fearing another attack. The princess, however, seemed more concerned with her own agenda, stating that she would not interfere with the maid and the prince. The princess, turning her gaze away, declared her lack of interest in anything beyond her current objective, offering the young man a shoulder title with a dismissive air. He watched her, a hint of confusion on his face. She then clarified her position, explaining that if their interests truly aligned, the identity of the prince was ultimately irrelevant. The young man stared back, taken aback by her bluntness. The maid, observing the exchange, remarked that it was chilling to even touch such a scoundrel, suggesting the princess had perhaps been too harsh in her words. The young man remained silent, his head bowed. The maid continued, noting the striking resemblance between the princess and the young man, so much so that with the right disguise, they could be mistaken for the same person. The princess, intrigued, inquired further about this disguise. She confessed that even she, despite her close proximity, hadn't noticed when the switch occurred, admitting her own lack of deductive skill. The princess listened, her expression one of growing astonishment. The maid elaborated, explaining that the subtle feeling of unease had begun that very morning, specifically in the large bath, where the switch had already taken place. The princess gasped in shock, while the young man remained bewildered, and another maid, in traditional attire, looked on with surprise. She gasped, recalling the princess's words about the prince and princess returning from outside, sharing a kiss. The princess herself had confirmed it, saying, "They did." The memory of the kiss ignited a furious rage within the assassin, who now held the young man, still disguised as the princess, in a tight grip. She demanded to know what the kiss meant, her eyes wide with disbelief and anger. As the young man struggled, the true princess, consumed by a terrifying fury, began to smash through the stone wall of her chamber, her strength seemingly boundless as she created a gaping hole. The disguised young man, caught in the chaos, tumbled downwards. The princess continued her destructive outburst, tearing through the masonry, while the maid, witnessing the shocking display, cried out in alarm, realizing the princess's fury had breached the very structure of the castle. She stared into the newly formed chasm, her face etched with despair, realizing the prince and princess had fallen into the river below. A desperate question formed on her lips. What should I do? As the maid grappled with the unfolding disaster, the young man, now back in his own attire, appeared beside her, looking into the hole. He asked her what had happened, his expression one of confusion, then questioned the prince. He continued to peer into the darkness, his brow furrowed in thought, muttering the name Prince Hans, as if trying to piece together a fragmented memory or a new, unsettling realization. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the chamber as the assassin burst through the doorway, her pickaxe raised. The young man and the maid recoiled in shock, the assassin declaring that hiding was useless. She advanced menacingly, demanding they quickly produce the princess, her anger palpable as she declared her impatience. The young man, still reeling from the previous events, could only ask, "Who is that?" The assassin, still clutching her pickaxe, glared with intense frustration, muttering about the situation and how irritating it was. The assassin, a fierce young woman with a pickaxe, stood ready for her next target. Suddenly, a wall shattered inward as the assassin burst into the room, startling the young man and the maid. She demanded to know why they were always so irritating, while the young man questioned the situation, asking for a simple explanation. With a menacing grin, the assassin declared herself an executioner, explaining that the previous attempt had failed. She vowed to personally ensure the princess's demise this time. Both the young man and the maid stared in disbelief, realizing she had just revealed her entire plan without prompting. Meanwhile, far from the chaos, a powerful waterfall cascaded into a rushing river, surrounded by dense forest. From the churning waters, two figures emerged, gasping for air and struggling to pull themselves onto the muddy bank. The princess, still wearing her tiara, grimaced in discomfort, while the maid lay exhausted beside her. She looked up, her eyes wide with alarm, realizing they had been swept much farther downstream than she had anticipated, the castle now a distant silhouette against the horizon. The maid, still struggling to move, muttered that it was only by sheer luck they hadn't died, wishing they had simply been left to perish. The princess, however, retorted with a sharp glare, questioning her maid's defeatist attitude. The princess, now fully enraged, accused the maid of attacking her again and demanded to know what she was saying, reminding her that she was a princess and that such behavior was unacceptable from a mudcat. The maid, equally furious, shouted back, denying the accusation. Still reeling from the ordeal, she lay on the ground, her maid observing her distress. The princess cried out, declaring that a kiss from the prince was worth 1,000 deaths, and that she could only think of him as a subordinate. She continued, explaining that it was unavoidable to try and corrupt Ariel's eyes, but ultimately, it was revealed. She then questioned who the scum prince truly was. The maid, equally frustrated, retorted that the prince's insults were also worth 1,000 deaths. Both women screamed at each other. Their argument escalated. As their heated exchange continued, the princess remarked that it would be fine, and she would teach the maid just how wonderful the prince truly was. The maid, however, muttered that it would likely take a long time, unaware of the numerous glowing eyes now watching them from the dark, dense forest. Suddenly, a rustling sound echoed through the trees, startling the princess. Her head snapped around, her eyes wide with alarm, as the maid also reacted with a gasp of surprise. The maid, now kneeling in fear, asked what was wrong. The princess, her expression grim and alert, replied that she sensed something, as if someone was there. She then questioned if it was an animal, but the maid quickly dismissed the idea, stating it was probably not. Furthermore, she added, it wasn't just one or two presences. Hidden amongst the trees, a group of small, hooded figures with glowing eyes observed the two women. One figure remarked that they didn't seem like bad people, while another found them cute, yet suspicious. A third urged everyone to be quiet. Just then, one of the hooded figures, a small boy with spiky hair, let out a loud sneeze, startling both the princess and the maid. Another hooded figure, a girl with dark hair, looked towards the sneezing boy. The princess, her fear quickly turning to anger, shouted for whoever was there to come out like an adult, while the maid remained frozen in terror beside her. The princess had just confronted the unseen figures. Now, from behind the trees, a group of 6 small, hooded figures peered out, their eyes wide with curiosity or alarm. One wore glasses, another had spiky hair, and a third seemed to be drooling, their presence now fully revealed. Their sudden appearance startled the princess and her maid, who were still soaked from the river. The princess, her eyes wide with shock, murmured about 6 people, while her maid, equally stunned, questioned if they were children. Meanwhile, far from the forest, within the confines of a grand estate, the assassin raged. She stomped her foot, demanding to know where the princess was, her voice laced with impatience and fury. Outside, a heavy rain poured down, mirroring her stormy mood. Her outburst left the young man, whom the maid addressed as Prince, looking troubled. He pondered the situation, while the maid, her face etched with concern, anxiously asked him what they should do. The assassin, growing increasingly agitated by the lack of answers, clenched her pickaxe. She declared that if they refused to speak, she would kill them one by one, her eyes burning with a dangerous resolve. Just then, the prince, standing before a gaping hole in a stone wall, cried out that the princess had fallen into the river. The maid beside him gasped in horror, her hands flying to her mouth as tears welled in her eyes. He then turned to the maid, arguing that if they did not answer the assassin, they would all be killed. The maid, however, countered, reminding him that the princess's life was being targeted, urging him to show some resolve. The prince, his face contorted in frustration, admitted that she had a point. He clenched his fist, acknowledging the futility of trying to resist such overwhelming force. From a distance, the assassin observed the prince and maid through the hole in the wall. She heard their exchange, particularly the prince's report of the princess falling into the river, and wondered if he was lying. She then mused aloud, questioning if the princess was truly dead, but decided it would be better to confirm the body. The assassin grumbled, annoyed that the princess had created such an unnecessary hassle. She continued, expressing her annoyance that the princess had fallen into the river, creating an unexpected complication. The prince and his maid listened, their faces etched with shock and disbelief. He, still reeling from the news, questioned if the assassin was referring to a child, perhaps a child assassin. She, however, clarified that the princess was much younger than herself, and her attitude was surprisingly bold for someone so small. Her gaze then shifted, looking up towards the distant tower, a structure that seemed to loom over the landscape. Meanwhile, the prince, his eyes wide with alarm, realized the gravity of the situation, exclaiming that the princess might be swept away by the river if they did not act quickly. His maid, equally distraught, cried out, confirming the princess's name and the urgency of the weather. He, now resolute, declared they must immediately search along the riverbank. His maid quickly affirmed her agreement, ready to follow his lead. The assassin watched their exchange, a slight smirk playing on her lips. She, holding her pickaxe firmly, considered the task ahead. It would be troublesome to search downstream, but she resolved to confirm the princess's fate. A young man questioned why the two were in such a place, his expression one of concern. The isolated house stood nestled deep within a dense forest, its windows dark and unwelcoming. Inside, the princess explained that she had been carelessly swept away by a river, expressing gratitude for the kind treatment she had received. The maid, standing beside her, echoed her thanks. However, the maid pointed to her head, noting the presence of blood. The princess quickly reassured her that the blood had already clotted and would not peel off. The maid then calmly declared that she was already dead and perfectly fine, a statement that left the princess utterly aghast. The princess, still reeling, quickly covered the maid's mouth, admonishing her to stop saying such unnecessary things. She insisted that the maid was so resilient, she wouldn't die even if someone tried to kill her. Meanwhile, a small crowd of children, including the young man, the assassin, and the skeleton child, had gathered, observing the exchange. One of them, a boy with glasses, added a thoughtful and yet. Back inside, the maid looked at the princess with a questioning gaze, asking if they were truly sisters. The princess's eyes widened in surprise at the direct inquiry. The princess suddenly exclaimed in realization, "Ah, that's right." The maid, however, began to cry, pleading with her sister not to make such an obvious expression. The princess embraced the maid, gently telling her that she couldn't simply declare herself an assassin. The maid, still tearful, conceded, "Well, that's true." As the group of children watched the interaction with wide eyes, suddenly, one of the young boys, with light hair, interjected, asking the princess, "By the way, you are the princess, aren't you?" Both the princess and the maid reacted with wide-eyed shock at his unexpected question. She gasped, her eyes wide with surprise as the young boy questioned her identity, asking why she thought she was a princess. She stammered, unable to form a coherent response. Meanwhile, two other children, a boy with spiky hair and glasses and a girl with a bob cut, seemed delighted by the idea, exclaiming that the princess must have had sisters and that princesses were indeed beautiful. As the children continued their innocent chatter, the maid's expression darkened, her eyes wide with a chilling intensity. She leaned in, suggesting to the princess that their cover had been blown and asking what they should do, even proposing they eliminate everyone. The princess, terrified, could only let out a small, panicked sound. She quickly retorted, reminding the maid that their opponents were merely children, emphasizing the fact with a desperate plea. She continued, her voice strained, asking if the maid truly expected her to keep a secret from living beings, implying it was an impossible task. Despite her protests, the maid's gaze remained fixed, her internal thoughts questioning if starting a conflict here was truly the optimal solution. Meanwhile, two other children, a girl with short dark hair and a boy with light spiky hair, were excitedly discussing the princess, confirming to each other that she was indeed a real princess. The spiky-haired boy from earlier, his face now shadowed, then asked the princess if there were any adults around, stating firmly that there were none. The princess, still holding onto the maid's arm, looked on in shock, her eyes wide with disbelief at the children's living situation. Her mind reeled, processing the revelation that these children lived alone, without any adults. She could only utter a stunned yes. In response to the boy's earlier question, the children, now gathered together, explained their communal life. One girl stated they all got along well, cooperating and playing in the forest. Another added that as long as they had their home, they were fine. Even the small skeleton child lay peacefully among them. She pondered the children's situation, wondering aloud how such pure beings could be burdened with a cruel fate like that of an assassin. She even mused that she might be better suited for such a role, to which the maid simply offered a knowing head. Following their earlier discussion, the children continued their introductions, each revealing a unique name: bashful, dopey, sneezy, sleepy, happy, and document amidst these innocent revelations, the assassin, who had been among them, declared that there was one more person, and she usually worked with her pickaxe. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the forest, the assassin stomped through the undergrowth, visibly irritated. She grumbled, demanding to know the princess's whereabouts, deeming her journey a waste of time and utterly vexing. As the hero and maid continued their trek, she speculated that the prince would undoubtedly follow them. Since his objective was to find the princess, she reasoned, their paths would converge if they simply followed the river. He considered the assassin's earlier words, noting that she didn't seem to intend them any harm. Yet, despite this, he found her presence and demeanor deeply unsettling. Stepping forward, he confronted the assassin directly, warning her not to underestimate them. He declared that if she intended to kill, she should do so without hesitation and nothing more. Her expression contorted in anger. She snapped back, cursing him and threatening to kill him next if he dared to interfere. She then demanded his answer, leaving him stunned. The maid, aghast, immediately interjected, asserting that killing people was wrong and the mark of the lowest scum. Beside her, he looked on, wondering if there was some underlying reason for the assassin's extreme behavior. She then earnestly pleaded with the assassin to explain, offering her help and suggesting she might be able to assist. However, the assassin curtly dismissed her, stating it had nothing to do with her. With a dismissive the assassin questioned why she should be compelled to speak with them, given they had only just met. The hero and maid stood by, observing her unyielding stance. The assassin, walking away, was called back by the maid, who had something important to discuss. The maid looked surprised, her eyes wide with a sudden realization. The maid, still surprised, listened as the assassin declared her grim intention. She would kill the princess. If she failed, she herself would be killed. She clenched her pickaxe, her face contorted in anger and desperation, explaining that her own family would be killed if she did not carry out the deed. Meanwhile, the princess, oblivious to the grim conversation unfolding nearby, boasted to the children about her vast collection of dresses, a bath large enough for 100 people, and most importantly, her adorable maid. The children, wide-eyed and captivated, asked if she also possessed a great deal of money, to which the princess proudly confirmed, asserting it was only natural for someone of her royal standing. The maid, however, looked on with a worried expression, her chin resting in her hand. The maid internally questioned the wisdom of trusting strangers, especially children she had only just met, her face etched with deep concern and a hint of fear. Elsewhere, the princess reveled in the children's admiration, beaming as they looked up to her. The maid, in turn, observed the young boy who had been so captivated by the princess's stories, a subtle smile playing on her lips. The maid, sitting alone, pondered the irony of her situation. Despite being an assassin, the princess seemed to be the one truly adored by the children, a complete reversal of what she might have expected for herself. Her thoughts were interrupted as the hero, with a worried expression, asked the princess if she was all right, suggesting a prince might come to rescue her soon. The princess, flustered and blushing, reacted with a delighted squeal, while the maid watched the scene unfold with a deadpan expression. The princess, still flustered, then suggested to the maid that perhaps living with the children here would be a good idea. The maid, however, was clearly exhausted, her body feeling heavy and her movements sluggish, as if she were burning up. She suggested a location somewhat distant from the castle, explaining that it would be a good place where outsiders rarely ventured. The princess looked at her, surprised by the proposal. However, she vehemently rejected the notion of taking care of the children, declaring her absolute hatred for the idea and expressing concern that the roof might catch fire. The maid stared back, taken aback by her outburst. As she continued to complain, even mentioning the maid's expression shifted to one of distress. Unseen by them, the assassin watched from the shadows, a subtle, knowing smile playing on her lips. Elsewhere, a young man with wide, frantic eyes held out a dark, glistening apple, asking if someone was hungry and offering the delicious apple with an almost desperate urgency. Two women, one adorned with a crown and the other with a frantic expression, stared down at a massive, ominous apple. Its surface seemed to pulse with an unsettling energy. Suddenly, a group of children appeared, their faces contorted in shock and fear. One of them clutched a smaller, ordinary apple, seemingly the cause of their distress. The child with the apple, despite their fear, bravely offered it to the uncrowned woman, stating it was an honor to meet her. The uncrowned woman, however, recoiled in terror, while the crowned woman seemed to question the gesture, expressing gratitude but with a hint of suspicion. As the uncrowned woman desperately tried to push the offering away, the crowned woman, with a wide, almost mischievous smile, readily accepted it, telling her companion to wait. The crowned woman then turned to her companion, questioning why she would reject the child's goodwill. The uncrowned woman, still visibly shaken, tried to explain that it was not what it seemed. Her gaze fixed on the apple, the uncrowned woman wondered aloud if there was something suspicious about it, asking if they shouldn't eat it. Meanwhile, the children, now in tears, profusely apologized for offering such a crude apple to the princess. The crowned woman, her expression hardening, angrily demanded to know if her companion had made the children cry. The uncrowned woman, still terrified, then blurted out her true fear. What if the apple was poisoned? Her words hung in the air, and the children, hearing the accusation of poison, burst into even louder sobs, their small bodies shaking with distress. The crowned woman, now thoroughly exasperated, sharply reprimanded her companion, asking if she felt no shame for making the children cry. The uncrowned woman, still panicked, tried to grab the apple, but the crowned woman intervened, declaring that she would take it instead, much to her companion's horror. She was urged by one of the children, who had offered the apple, to eat it quickly, assuring her there was no need to hold back. With a wide smile, she declared that since they had gone to such trouble, they should all eat the apple together. Her companion, the uncrowned woman, looked on in utter shock. As the crowned woman brought the apple to her mouth, her companion shrieked in horror, her hands seemingly shattering into fragments in a desperate, futile attempt to intervene. Meanwhile, the children who had offered the apple stood frozen, their faces contorted in distress, tears streaming down their cheeks. The crowned woman, having taken a bite, looked down at the weeping children, asking why they weren't eating and what was wrong. Her expression hardening into a furious glare, she then commanded them to eat, insisting they should not hold back. Her stern words only intensified the children's terror, and they all burst into even louder, more frantic sobs, sweat beading on their faces. The uncrowned woman, still reeling from the events, muttered that the crowned woman was truly a killer for taking the bait, in reverse, implying a deadly trap. The crowned woman, however, appeared utterly bewildered by the comment. Still confused, the crowned woman took another bite of the apple, savoring it with a soft hum, while her companion watched in renewed, wide-eyed horror. Suddenly, a wave of intense pain racked her body, sending her sprawling to the ground, clutching her stomach in agony as she cried out in distress. Her companion, now beside her, frantically questioned what she was doing. She lay there, poisoned and in pain, as the uncrowned woman looked down with a mix of exasperation and anger. The uncrowned woman called her a fool, demanding to know if she truly had not realized the apple was poisoned. Meanwhile, the blonde child with glasses, clutching a pickaxe, declared that it would have been better if both women had consumed the apple. He added that since the older sister had warned them, their current predicament was unavoidable. The uncrowned woman, now standing and visibly distressed, confronted the children, demanding to know their true objective, especially given their young age. One of the dark-haired children looked away, muttering about family. The dark-haired child, still tearful, was held by the child with the apple, who then revealed their true motive: money. He explained that the castle held vast riches, and their plan was to capture the princess and demand a hefty ransom. Shocked by their brazen declaration, the uncrowned woman shouted at them, questioning if they truly believed such a scheme was possible. The children, now all armed with pickaxes, retorted that she was being too loud and that they would capture her like an adult, as she was the only one left to deal with. The blonde child with glasses, brandishing his pickaxe, challenged her directly, asking if she intended to resist. He confidently asserted that she could not possibly fight against children. In a sudden burst of movement, the uncrowned woman leaped high into the air, attempting to escape, while the children below watched in momentary surprise before beginning their pursuit. She landed gracefully before the children, her expression now stern, and informed them that their status as children did not grant them immunity for their actions. She warned them that bad children would face punishment. The children recoiled in terror, their faces contorted in distress, as the uncrowned woman, with a wide, unsettling smile, declared that it was time for their punishment. Overwhelmed by fear, the children turned and fled in a desperate panic, screaming as the uncrowned woman pursued them relentlessly. She pursued the children relentlessly, her voice echoing as she commanded them to flee deeper into the forest. Her pursuit led her to a small room where she discovered the child with the apple lying asleep on the floor, a pickaxe abandoned nearby. Upon seeing this, her expression shifted to one of profound shock and distress, murmuring a soft exclamation. She gazed down at the sleeping child, a thought forming in her mind about the loneliness of leaving him behind. Meanwhile, the other children, having seemingly escaped, suddenly reacted with alarm, exclaiming about the sleeping child. As they realized their companion had been captured, she confronted them, questioning the importance of their family and demanding an apology from them now. With a chilling, wide smile, she declared that children were not meant to cry and promised them a thorough punishment, holding the terrified child by his tunic. The crowned woman, her face contorted in a furious scream, held a small child upside down by one leg. The child, drooling and seemingly unconscious, hung limp as other children watched in wide-eyed terror. She stood before two of the children, the unconscious one still dangling from her hand, her presence radiating an oppressive aura. One of the children, a blond boy, demanded she return sleepy, while his companion, a dark-haired boy, questioned her intentions. The crowned woman, now on the ground and looking distraught, clutched her head. Beside her, the uncrowned woman lay motionless. She muttered in frustration, wondering why they would return poison so easily. A chaotic struggle erupted as the children lunged at her, attempting to free their companion. She fiercely resisted, kicking one of them away. Standing over the two children, who now lay on the ground, one weeping and the other staring up in terror, she raised a hand as if to strike. The blond child, seizing an opportunity, scrambled desperately towards an open window, his face etched with fear. The crowned woman watched, aghast, as he squeezed through the narrow opening and vanished. She cursed his evasiveness. Still consumed by rage, she lunged towards the window, her hand outstretched, shouting for the brat to stop. She found herself trapped in the window frame, unable to follow. Her anger momentarily subsided, replaced by a desperate plea for him to listen, promising she would not be angry. The crowned woman was trapped in the window. She watched as one of the children, the blonde one with glasses, looked back at her from the forest. Below, the uncrowned woman's eyes widened in terror. Her terror intensified, her eyes bulging as she screamed, a desperate, guttural sound escaping her lips as she struggled to free herself from the window. Despite her frantic efforts, she remained stuck, crying out in despair. Below, the crowned woman lay on the ground, seemingly unconscious, having fallen from the window. Moments later, the entire house was engulfed in flames, black smoke billowing from its windows and roof. The group of children stood before it, their backs to the inferno, their faces etched with shock and disbelief. As the children watched, the uncrowned woman, now free from the window, emerged from a hole in the ground near the burning house, her body covered in dirt and her expression one of utter exhaustion. She muttered that it had been a struggle. She clutched her head, lamenting her inconvenient body and how it had robbed her of her freedom in the sunlight. The children, still reeling from the destruction of their home, turned to face her, their faces a mixture of fear and confusion. They murmured about their precious home. Still crawling on the ground, the uncrowned woman retorted that they deserved their fate, claiming they were the ones who were originally evil. Two of the children, the one with dark spiky hair and the one with white hair, cried out that her actions were cruel, a great sin, and utterly wicked. She continued her accusations, stating that she hated children because they always played the victim. She then challenged them, asking if they truly believed their plot to lure the princess was not a grave sin. The blonde child with glasses, taken aback, then remembered to ask about the princess. The uncrowned woman, still in the hole, looked up at him. The crowned woman gasped, her head breaking the surface of a pool of water, eyes wide with shock and fear. Moments later, she lay sprawled on the wooden floor, flames licking at the debris around her, the heat intense and suffocating. Despite the inferno, she pushed herself forward, her face contorted in a furious grimace, cursing the idiot princess who had, of all things, set the fire. The burning structure around her seemed to mock her struggle, as a voice in her mind questioned the paralysis gripping her body, wondering if it was Ringo's poison and why it struck at such a critical moment. Still, she refused to yield, desperately urging her limbs to move, to crawl, to escape, even if it meant dragging herself away with only her arms. Her hands stretched out, fingers splayed, as a chilling thought echoed in her mind. Was this truly the end? As she struggled, a cloaked figure emerged from the shadows, a knife glinting in her hand, declaring herself an assassin and stating that she was prepared for a miserable death. A faint, desperate plea escaped her lips. Help! Suddenly, the ceiling above shattered, and a spiky-haired young man descended with a powerful kick, debris scattering around him as he burst into the burning room. He lunged forward, his face set in a fierce grimace, while another similar figure followed close behind, both moving to confront the assassin and the perilous situation, leaving the crowned woman stunned on the floor. He moved with incredible speed, carrying the crowned woman as he vaulted through the burning structure, debris raining down around them. As he continued his desperate escape, the crowned woman, despite her predicament, chastised him, calling him a worthless prince and questioning his recklessness. He retorted, asking what she would do if he were to die. He pressed her, asking if she would prefer to burn to death in the collapsing building or be captured by the princess and executed. She scoffed at his question, declaring that there was no difference, and then, with a pained expression, called him an idiot. The spiky-haired male knelt beside the crowned woman, his expression etched with concern as he questioned what had befallen her, noting the dangerous situation she was in. She offered a quiet apology, while behind them, a building burned fiercely. As he knelt, the uncrowned woman suddenly rushed into the clearing, her eyes wide with alarm, asking if they were all right. The spiky-haired male explained that the crowned woman's body was paralyzed by poison, unable to move. Nearby, a small, pale figure was partially buried in the ground, looking distressed. His eyes widened in shock and anger at the mention of poison, and he demanded to know why such a thing had been used. Just then, the second spiky-haired male appeared, calmly stating that the poison would wear off and heal in a while. He then expressed a longing sentiment, claiming he had missed the prince. His words stunned the crowned woman and uncrowned woman, who stared in disbelief. The uncrowned woman questioned why he would kidnap the princess. The second spiky-haired male clarified that it was his original purpose, and the princess's body was merely temporarily unable to move. As he turned to leave the burning structure behind, the uncrowned woman confronted him, demanding to know who he truly was. Her frustration mounted as she realized her house was burning. Gripping a sturdy staff, she muttered in disbelief at the unfolding chaos. Meanwhile, the crowned woman and spiky-haired male reacted with shock as the uncrowned woman, still reeling from the destruction, questioned why there were two princesses. Her rage now fully consuming her, the uncrowned woman gripped her staff tightly, her face contorted in fury as she contemplated killing both of them. Consumed by a furious despair, she lashed out, swinging her pickaxe wildly at the terrified children. They screamed, scrambling to escape her violent outburst, their small bodies recoiling from the enraged woman. Her rage then turned to the crowned woman, demanding to know why she had left without consulting them, asserting that they were a family of 7. She retorted, explaining that she had found a job that would bring them money, and that it would be fine if she just went for a little while and talked to her family later. The children, however, were not appeased, crying out that there must have been some unspoken reason for her actions, and if she truly desired money, they too could become strong enough to help. She looked at them, her expression softening slightly as she reiterated, "We are family." Just then, the spiky-haired who had been observing, interjected, stating that she was trying to take on the burden of protecting their precious family from those who sought to kill the princess, all by herself. Enraged by his words, she swung the pickaxe towards him, shouting for him to stop saying unnecessary things, threatening to kill him. The children watched, wide-eyed and terrified. He remained unfazed, calmly asking if she truly believed she could carry out such a threat. She scoffed, asserting that she was certainly capable, and warned him not to underestimate her. He leaned forward, his gaze piercing, and dismissed her bravado, declaring that he could see right through her act. She was merely trying to intimidate him to mask her own fear. She recoiled, her face contorted in anger, demanding to know if he truly understood the gravity of the situation. He countered, his voice low and menacing, that the blood of those she killed would not simply wash away. Instead, it would darken and fester, and she would regret it, a regret that would eventually consume her entirely. The chilling warning from the spiky-haired male echoed in her mind, twisting into a chorus of accusing voices. She felt overwhelmed by a multitude of eyes staring, condemning her for living when another should have died in her place, demanding atonement with her own life. Yet, she refused to be lectured by him. She questioned who he truly was, sensing that he knew her very being, as if he understood her deeply. He recoiled slightly, a look of surprise and concern crossing his face as her words struck a nerve. His gaze then fell upon the small, pale figure still submerged in the water, and a grim realization dawned on him. Could this person truly have killed someone? He pressed further, demanding to know the true objective of the one called Grandpa. Meanwhile, the uncrowned woman, her expression sharp, turned her attention to the submerged figure, demanding to know who was targeting the princess's life. The crowned woman, standing nearby, dismissed her questions as futile, indicating that further inquiry would be pointless. She elaborated, explaining that assassinations were typically arranged through intermediaries to conceal the client's identity. These brokers would accept payment, and then an assassin would carry out the deed. The uncrowned woman's eyes widened in shock at the mention of an intermediary. She then revealed that such brokers existed precisely to prevent information about the client from leaking in case of failure, and that she herself was one of those who would kill for money. The crowned woman observed her, noting that while she claimed to be an assassin, it seemed more like she was being held hostage, with her precious family being used as collateral, more valuable than any gold. She stood before the group, her expression troubled as she heard the accusation. "You killed the princess." She questioned what they meant by such a statement. As the children around her cried out, "Grumpy," she clenched her jaw, her eyes narrowing in a fierce gaze. She dismissed their concerns, telling them it was nothing, before turning her sharp gaze to the spiky-haired male. She challenged him, asking if he was truly prepared for what was to come. He met her gaze, asserting his readiness. With a furious declaration, she proclaimed her willingness to get stained with blood and regret for the sake of her family, raising her pickaxe menacingly. The spiky-haired male, shocked by her intensity, warned her not to interfere, threatening to kill her if she did. He then crouched, preparing for her inevitable attack. Meanwhile, in another location, the crowned woman looked on in panic, realizing the gravity of the situation. Beside her, the pale figure, buried up to their neck, cried out desperately, calling for the prince. Back at the confrontation, the uncrowned woman brought her pickaxe down with immense force, aiming for the spiky-haired male. The children watched in wide-eyed terror, once again crying out, "Grumpy," as the attack unfolded. A group of individuals gathered in a cavernous space, some appearing distressed while others worked diligently. The crowned woman looked on with an exasperated expression as a child cried nearby. Meanwhile, a spiky-haired man and another child dug into the earth, seemingly attempting to unearth something. Suddenly, the tranquility shattered as a hooded assassin lunged from above, targeting the spiky-haired man. The children and the crowned woman recoiled in shock and fear. Simultaneously, a pale figure, previously submerged, began to emerge from a pool of water, their eyes wide with terror. The assassin continued their relentless assault, striking with swift, precise movements. The spiky-haired man, however, proved agile, narrowly evading each blow. He quickly retaliated, grabbing a pickaxe and swinging it defensively, forcing the hooded assailant to momentarily retreat from the direct confrontation. Undaunted, the assassin changed tactics, now wielding a menacing scythe. They swung the sharp blade with deadly intent, but the spiky-haired man once again dodged the attack, his eyes fixed on his opponent. The relentless attack persisted, the scythe whistling through the air as the assassin aimed another powerful strike. He continued to evade, his movements fluid and quick. He leaped into the air, narrowly avoiding a sweeping blow, while the assassin below gritted their teeth in frustration, their attacks proving ineffective. Amidst the ongoing chaos, he acted decisively, reaching down and firmly grasping the leg of the pale figure still emerging from the ground. The assassin, still focused on their primary objective, continued their assault, swinging the scythe with renewed vigor, seemingly undeterred by the man's actions. Despite the persistent threat, he exerted all his strength, pulling the pale, distressed figure further from the earth, their bodies still partially submerged and covered in grime. The pale figure, recently freed, screamed in terror, her eyes wide with an unbridled fear. Below her, a dark-haired woman lay on the ground, seemingly disoriented and struggling to rise, her own eyes wide with a mix of shock and pain. As the pale figure continued to shriek, a spiky-haired man, observing from a distance, threw a small object into the water, creating a ripple. He watched intently, his expression grim, as the dark-haired woman, now partially submerged, looked up at him with a desperate plea in her eyes. The dark-haired woman found herself plunged into the murky depths, struggling against the unseen currents. Bubbles escaped her lips as she fought to orient herself, her eyes squeezed shut in discomfort. She thrashed violently, attempting to break free from the water's grasp, her body contorted in a desperate struggle. Her eyes now open, she grimaced, a determined yet pained expression etched across her face as she fought to surface. Suddenly, the pale figure, still screaming, lunged forward with an unearthly cry. The dark-haired woman, her hand reaching out in a futile attempt to defend herself, watched in horror as the figure's distorted face bore down on her. The pale figure's hand clamped around the dark-haired woman's neck, a shocking act of aggression. The dark-haired woman's face contorted in pain and surprise as she was caught off guard by the sudden assault. The pale figure continued to shriek, her grip tightening on the dark-haired woman's throat. Then, with a burst of raw energy, she unleashed a powerful blast, sending the dark-haired woman reeling backward. The force of the attack sent the dark-haired woman tumbling back into the water, her body flailing uncontrollably. As she sank, the pale figure pursued her relentlessly, grabbing her once more, dragging her deeper into the dark liquid. The pale figure held the dark-haired woman firmly by the neck, submerging her completely. Both struggled violently beneath the surface, the pale figure's eyes wide with a terrifying intensity, while the dark-haired woman fought desperately for air. Their faces, locked in a desperate struggle, were contorted with fear and desperation. The pale figure's grip remained unyielding, her eyes wide and frantic, while the dark-haired woman's own eyes mirrored the terror of her predicament, her mouth agape in a silent scream. She was violently expelled from the water, her body arching as if thrown, the force of the impact leaving her gasping for air. Meanwhile, on the shore, the crowned woman, still weakened, struggled to her knees, her voice strained as she cried out the name, Ariel, to the pale figure who had just been pulled from the depths, while the spiky-haired man watched with concern. He turned to the crowned woman, his brow furrowed with worry, asking if she was truly all right after the poison, questioning if she felt any lingering pain or if her consciousness was fading. She confirmed that she was slowly recovering, but lamented the unfortunate timing of their current predicament, her gaze fixed on the commotion in the water. The dark-haired woman lay on the ground, exhausted and soaked, the pale figure beside her, seemingly unconscious. She looked at the figure with wide eyes, expressing her disbelief and frustration, having assumed the people from the castle were weak and insignificant. She continued, her voice laced with annoyance, asserting that she had never asked for their help and was perfectly capable of swimming on her own. Despite her earlier protests, a faint blush touched her cheeks as she offered a reluctant, almost mumbled, "Thank you." Her gaze then shifted back to the pale figure, a flicker of surprise crossing her face as she realized the figure had actually jumped into the water. As the crowned woman approached, she chastised the dark-haired woman for her immodest attire, but the dark-haired woman, still defiant, retorted that she would not be lectured by them. The pale figure, now conscious, watched the exchange from the ground. The pale figure, now clinging to the dark-haired woman, pondered the sensation, finding it distinctly different from being held by a prince, and wondered if this unexpected feeling was one of peace or happiness. Still clinging to the dark-haired woman, the pale figure watched as she screamed in utter frustration, her face contorted with anguish as she cried out, "Damn it!" Her frustration continued to simmer as she sat, head bowed, contemplating the dire choice before her. She knew she had to act, for if she did not, her family would suffer. His declaration hung heavy in the air, drawing the dark-haired woman's gaze upward. He stood over her, demanding to know why she was attempting to shoulder such a heavy burden alone. He continued to press her, his voice firm. He questioned her, stating that if her family's life was truly at stake, there must be another way, a different course of action. He then offered a glimmer of hope, his expression thoughtful. He suggested that perhaps, despite the grim circumstances, something could still be done. Deep within a sun-dappled forest, a small group had gathered. Several children sat or stood, their expressions a mix of apprehension and curiosity, while a young woman in a princess-like dress looked on with concern. Nearby, a spiky-haired warrior and a dark-haired woman in a ponytail conversed, their attention drawn to a cloaked figure who seemed to be the focus of their discussion. The spiky-haired warrior turned to the cloaked figure, his brow furrowed with determination, and assured her that they meant no harm. He declared that they would not bring any danger upon her. He then explained to the princess and the children that her life had been repeatedly targeted until now. He emphasized that if things continued as they were, not only the princess but also the children would remain in grave danger. Turning his gaze to the dark-haired woman, whom he called Grampy, he pressed her for details. He stated that it was imperative to find the client responsible for the assassination attempts and put a stop to them, urging her to recount everything she knew about the time she was asked to kill the princess. The dark-haired woman, her expression grim, began to recall the past. She remembered a specific time when she had gone to town alone to sell jewels. As she walked through the narrow, shadowed streets of the town, a voice called out to her, simply saying, "Hey." She turned to see the hooded figure, who then asked her if she had ever killed a human. The dark-haired woman, annoyed by the question, retorted that she had done no such thing, her hands on her hips in defiance. The hooded figure then provocatively asked if she wanted to make her the first. The hooded figure, with a slight smile, tried to engage her in conversation, stating she just wanted to talk a little. However, the dark-haired woman, clearly irritated, dismissed her, declaring she had no interest and warning her to stay away. Despite the dismissal, the hooded figure continued, remarking that the dark-haired woman seemed to have a close family. This unexpected comment caused the dark-haired woman to gasp in surprise, demanding to know how the hooded figure knew such a personal detail. The hooded figure, with a sinister grin, mused that the princess, being sleepy and defenseless, would be easy to silence. As the hooded figure harbored these dark thoughts, Ponytail Female launched herself forward, a blur of motion across the open space. She landed a powerful blow, striking the hooded figure with a furious punch that sent them sprawling. "Don't you dare lay a hand on them, you scoundrel," she roared, her anger palpable. The hooded figure, now seated on the ground, composed themselves and explained that they were merely an intermediary, managing weak humans. They asserted that they would not choose their methods to achieve their goals, for even a small fry had their pride, and failure was simply not an option. Ponytail Female, still wary, demanded to know the hooded figure's true request. The hooded figure, with a sly smile, revealed their actual desire. They wanted the princess killed. She scoffed, telling the hooded figure to handle the task themselves. The hooded figure, however, reminded her of their own weakness and mentioned that a previous assassin had already failed in the attempt. The hooded figure pressed on, insisting that they absolutely had to complete this request. They argued that they did not want to be seen as incompetent, emphasizing that trust was the most important aspect of their work. They continued, declaring that they possessed both pride and a strong sense of responsibility, and would resort to any means, no matter how unsavory, to fulfill their duty. To illustrate their ruthlessness, the hooded figure suddenly seized a small, dark-haired child, holding them down and threatening to use them as a shield. The child cried out in terror. In a swift, furious motion, Ponytail Female delivered a powerful kick to the hooded figure, her face contorted with rage at the blatant threat against the innocent child. Enraged by the threat, she violently struck the hooded figure with a pillow, sending them reeling back, seemingly stunned by the unexpected assault. Moments later, the hooded figure, having recovered, walked away down a narrow alley, their voice echoing with a chilling warning. They commanded that the princess be dealt with by tomorrow, or the next target would not be a mere doll. Still visibly upset, Ponytail Female reflected on the hooded figure's chilling words. She understood that she could not protect everyone by herself, and that the hooded figure might employ any tactic, even striking while they slept. This grim realization hardened her resolve. Meanwhile, the spiky-haired male sat beside the hooded figure, addressing Ponytail Female. He declared that he neither sought forgiveness nor feared her hatred for his actions, explaining that his decision was the result of a grave choice made for the sake of his family's lives. He asserted that he held no regrets. The princess, observing the hooded figure's apparent failure, seemed to grasp the unfolding situation. She mused aloud, realizing that Grampy had been hired precisely because her own assassination attempt had proven unsuccessful. The hooded figure looked on, a surprised expression on their face. With a determined and somewhat exasperated expression, the spiky-haired male declared that there was no other choice. He then stated unequivocally that the princess must die, a pronouncement that left the hooded figure wide-eyed with surprise. The children and Ponytail Female reacted with collective shock and disbelief to the spiky-haired male's declaration, their faces contorted in wide-eyed astonishment. The hooded figure, having delivered their message and witnessed the unfolding drama, walked away down a narrow, shadowed alley, leaving the others to grapple with the implications. Later, ponytail female leaned against a wall, her arms crossed, a thoughtful expression on her face. Nearby, the spiky-haired male's intense gaze suggested a deep resolve or a brewing plan. He then walked past her in the alley, remarking on her surprisingly swift progress. She watched him go, a subtle expression on her face. Still reeling from the previous confrontation, she listened as the hooded figure, with a sly look, spoke of family and the desperation it could bring. Annoyed, she curtly told the figure to be quiet. Her frustration evident, she demanded that the hooded figure confirm the body and dispose of it swiftly. The hooded figure merely observed her outburst. The hooded figure, ignoring her tone, began to pull back a sheet, remarking that the princess would die quickly even without being displayed. She watched, arms crossed, her expression still one of annoyance. As the sheet was fully drawn back, the princess was revealed, lying still within a wheeled bed, appearing unconscious or deceased. The hooded figure then turned to the princess with a wide, unsettling grin, holding the sheet. She praised Grampy for a job well done and provocatively asked if it was acceptable to sell the princess to perverts. To their surprise, the princess's eyes snapped open, wide with terror. Later, the hooded figure explained to the assembled group, including the spiky-haired male and the children, that the princess was, in fact, immortal. She clarified that to truly die, the princess needed to be exposed to sunlight once more. The others reacted with stunned disbelief, questioning her immortality. She continued her explanation, attributing this unusual ability to the power of love, and then mused aloud if love truly held such boundless power. The spiky-haired male looked skeptical, while the children appeared confused by the fantastical claim. Meanwhile, the princess, now standing and seemingly recovered, addressed the children. She confessed that she was a former assassin and that various circumstances had led her to act as a substitute for the true princess. The children listened intently, absorbing the unexpected revelation. Upon hearing this, ponytail female's anger flared, declaring the entire situation truly troublesome and utterly irritating. The princess, looking remorseful, apologized to Grampy for inadvertently involving her in such a complicated affair. Still seething, she asserted that to prevent the princess's life from being continually targeted and to ensure that no more Grampy-like individuals emerged from such chaos, decisive action was required. The princess and the children watched her, awaiting her next move. She listened as the spiky-haired warrior explained their immediate objective, to locate the client who ordered the princess's assassination. To achieve this, he stated, they first needed to contact Grampy and extract information from the broker. He then told her, with a slight smirk, that he would rely on her again when the next request came. She reacted with a mix of surprise and growing frustration, her fists clenching. Enraged by his words, she shouted, demanding to know if their previous agreement, that they would not interfere if she killed the princess, had been nothing but a lie. He looked away, feigning ignorance about any such promise, claiming he was merely following orders. He continued, his voice dismissive, stating that he would not let her escape and that she was merely a convenient tool. Her face contorted in fury, her teeth gritted. Leaning closer, his expression turning menacing, he questioned if she truly believed he would kill his own family. He then asked if she considered his work dirty, implying that such necessary, unpleasant tasks were his burden alone. He then pointed a finger at her, a wide, unsettling smile spreading across his face, suggesting she should be grateful. He declared that her world was now facing him, while behind him, the hooded figure watched with wide, terrified eyes. The hooded figure, with the dark-haired warrior beside her, asked the spiky-haired warrior if they should return to the prince now that he had finished his task. The dark-haired warrior remarked on his apparent skill. However, the dark-haired warrior, her face contorted in anger, suddenly struck the spiky-haired warrior, declaring it was his just reward for attempting to harm her family. She continued, addressing a shadowy, indistinct figure, thanking them and clarifying that she had only followed the prince's request. Meanwhile, the hooded figure and the spiky-haired warrior discussed their next move. He proposed a plan to capture the intermediary by feigning death, but she vehemently expressed her dislike for being separated from the prince and insisted on a swift resolution, flatly refusing his suggestion. Her expression then shifted dramatically to one of wide-eyed excitement as she eagerly asked if it was truly permissible for her to do as she pleased if she succeeded. With renewed fervor, she declared she would capture the intermediary, even if it meant her own demise, much to the shock of the spiky-haired warrior and the observation of the princess and dark-haired warrior, along with some children. Later, as the hooded figure stood outside with the dark-haired warrior, the latter questioned if her decision was truly acceptable. The hooded figure, with unwavering resolve, asserted that there was no problem. She then turned her gaze, asking if the individual before her was indeed the princess of this land. The group, including the hooded figure, the spiky-haired warrior, the princess, the dark-haired warrior, and several children, gathered in a grand hall. As they looked up, a new adult woman with long dark hair stood among the children, all of them gazing upwards with expressions of surprise, while the dark-haired warrior looked on with a hint of annoyance. She, a castle attendant, addressed the newcomers, offering to guide them through the grand halls and cautioning them not to lose their way within the sprawling estate. Her expression was one of surprise. Her surprise intensified as she took in the sight of the hooded figure, the spiky-haired male, the princess, and the ponytail female, accompanied by several children. The ponytail female, observing the opulent surroundings, remarked on the prince and princess's evident wealth. The princess, meanwhile, called out for the prince, uttering his name, Ariel. Still reeling from the unexpected arrivals, the attendant questioned the prince's whereabouts, stating that his sudden disappearance had caused a massive commotion throughout the castle. The princess added to the attendant's distress, revealing that a large hole now marred the wall of the prince's room. The attendant, now facing the entire group, including the enigmatic hooded figure and the multitude of children, expressed her utter bewilderment at their sheer numbers and demanded to know the identities of the young ones. The spiky-haired male quickly interjected, urging the attendant to pause. He acknowledged her assertion that the castle was no place for commoners, but then clarified that these children were, in fact, his benefactors, having aided him and the princess in their time of need. He continued his explanation, detailing how the wall of the princess's room had collapsed, sweeping her away into the river. He recounted that Ariel had rushed to search for her, and it was these very children who had cooperated in the rescue effort. The attendant, her expression thoughtful, inquired if the wall's collapse was due to simple deterioration. The spiky-haired male, averting his gaze with a slight blush, conceded that it might indeed appear that way. Understanding dawned on the attendant as she acknowledged his explanation. The spiky-haired male then insisted that he wished to properly thank his saviors and repay them, especially since they appeared to have lost their home. With a sudden shift in focus, the attendant listened with a surprised expression as the spiky-haired male pointed to the hooded figure, demanding to know why that individual was tied up. He declared the hooded figure a villain he had apprehended and ordered her to be placed in a cell. The hooded figure, looking down, had a sudden realization. The request made to her was strikingly similar to the one made to the princess. The princess, her eyes narrowed in a determined gaze, seemed to be arriving at the same profound understanding. She looked up, startled, as the spiky-haired warrior instructed her to give the children work while they were here. Nearby, the hooded figure, still bound, glanced towards the dark-haired warrior. A grimace of pain or deep distress twisted her features beneath the hood. Her eyes narrowed in a pained expression. As the hooded figure remained silent, the dark-haired warrior suddenly gasped, a realization dawning upon her. She quickly turned to the hooded figure, explaining that it was dangerous for her to remain in her current state and that she should change in the princess's room. With a cheerful declaration, she then led the hooded figure and the excited children away, the spiky-haired warrior watching them depart. The group moved through the castle, the hooded figure still tied, as the princess and the spiky-haired warrior remained behind, observing their departure. He turned to the princess, his expression stern, questioning the wisdom of bringing the monster princess into the castle, fearing exposure. She countered, arguing that it was better to keep her within sight, where they could protect her, rather than risk her being attacked if left alone. Her argument was cut short as a hand suddenly reached out from off-panel, grabbing her. Both she and the spiky-haired warrior, along with the dark-haired adult woman and the pipe male, looked on in utter surprise and confusion. He stared, wide-eyed and shocked, as she, too, registered the unexpected touch, her initial surprise quickly turning to a look of profound embarrassment and distress. With a sudden, forceful tug, he was pulled along, his arm linked with hers, as both were led away, their faces a mixture of shock and bewilderment. She, still caught in the argument with the spiky-haired male, insisted that their current situation was unavoidable. She explained that within the castle, they had no choice but to feign good relations. He, understanding her point, conceded. She continued, questioning if he truly believed she enjoyed the circumstances, clarifying that she was merely wearing the attire required. He retorted, asking if she possessed no sense of shame, but she dismissed his concern, stating that no one would truly care. The scene shifted to a lavish, empty bedroom, dominated by a grand, ornate canopy bed, suggesting a moment of respite or transition. Moments later, both the princess and the spiky-haired male lay sprawled on the bed, clearly exhausted. He expressed a deep sigh of relief, finally able to let his guard down, while she lamented the constant need for pretense and the numerous brushes with death they had endured. They remained on the bed, both appearing weary from the day's events. The princess subtly cast a glance in his direction, her expression unreadable. She then directly asked him if he truly had no intention of killing her, revealing her assumption that he was the one who had requested her assassination. He reacted with a startled exclamation, calling out to her in surprise. He sat up, looking agitated, and questioned if she truly perceived him as someone who would request such a cruel act. She responded with a swift and unequivocal yes. He admitted that he had always suspected her of being the one who gave the order for his capture, but expressed relief that his suspicions were unfounded. She looked at him, still holding a hint of suspicion in her gaze. Later, the spiky-haired male was seen sitting alone on the floor, his head bowed in distress. He confessed a grim truth to himself. He was the one who truly desired to kill the princess, for if he did not, he would surely die. He continued his internal monologue, acknowledging that while humans naturally resist being killed, he lacked the personal resolve and determination to commit the act himself. He recalled the moment she fell into the river, admitting that a part of him had rejoiced, wondering if she might have died by accident. He reflected on his own nature, admitting to himself that he truly was a despicable scoundrel, willing to kill others to survive. The princess, overhearing his internal struggle, reacted with a soft gasp. She then countered his self-assessment, stating that he, too, must know the true nature of those who would seek to destroy him. She asserted that she, more than anyone, understood his wretchedness. The princess continued, declaring that the person before him was a killer, a wretched woman who had lived by taking lives and could not be saved. She looked at him intently, explaining that it was strange, but she was the only one who could truly understand his feelings, even if he were to kill her. As they sat together, she concluded that if they were both such wretched humans, then they could also accept the sins and punishments that came with their actions. She then declared that if she did not mind being a princess, then she would not mind him being a prince either. The princess pressed him further, asking him to tell her why he had saved her from the burning house without regard for the danger. She questioned if he was trying to push away his master, or perhaps even protect her. He flinched, surprised by her directness. She then asked him why he would go to such lengths, and what kind of existence she was to him. Was she merely a temporary princess and prince? Suddenly, a door burst open with a loud bang, and the princess, now clad in a maid outfit, called out to him with a cheerful, almost desperate plea for him to look at her. She presented herself, asking him to look at her, noting how different and fresh she appeared compared to usual. She then questioned if he didn't think such a change was good sometimes, leaving him and her original self utterly bewildered. Still in her maid attire, she reminded him of his previous words, asserting that he had given her permission to do as she pleased with his body. With a determined, almost mischievous declaration, she announced her intention to take it, but her bold statement was immediately followed by a series of frantic, almost panicked exclamations and sounds. A maid, her expression filled with apology, bowed deeply before the princess, who stood partially clothed and visibly distressed. The maid expressed deep regret for the way the princess was being treated. The maid then explained that for now, a disguise was necessary to avoid being recognized by those within the castle. The princess, looking away, offered a quiet, "Thank you," though a hint of confusion lingered in her expression. She sat, her gaze cast downward, reflecting on her past ignorance. She realized she had been too slow to understand that there were people, like her maid, who served her with such unwavering loyalty. As the maid continued to meticulously style her hair, the princess lamented how she had always been confined to her own world, never truly seeing the prince or those around her. She wondered if it was already too late to change. Now fully disguised in a maid's uniform, the princess smiled brightly, revealing her name to be Ariel. Her maid, taken aback, stared in wide-eyed surprise at the sudden revelation. Ariel, filled with newfound determination, declared she would immediately go to see the prince. Her maid, however, frantically urged her to be careful and ensure no one recognized her true identity. Moments later, Ariel, now back in her royal attire, stood before a grand door, her face contorted in frustration. She pounded on it repeatedly, demanding to be let in, her patience clearly worn thin. She strode down a long, arched hallway, her expression one of utter annoyance. She muttered about the complete lack of tension, despite the ongoing requests for her assassination and the constant threat of another attack. As she continued her walk, she questioned her own irritation. She knew being targeted was simply her lot in life, yet she couldn't shake the feeling of annoyance. Her maid, still looking nervous, cautiously approached her from behind. Ariel glanced back, her expression shifting. In a close-up of her eye revealed a sharp, determined glint. She found herself in the maid uniform once more, her face contorted in an angry grimace. She complained vehemently about the frilly attire, declaring it unsuitable for her, and grumbled about the necessity of working within the castle walls. A small, ethereal image of herself, still in royal dress, floated nearby, observing that the maid uniform actually suited her quite well. After her brief stint in disguise, she was back in her royal attire, a tiara adorning her head, but a look of confusion now crossed her face. She then inquired, asking if anyone knew of a Rose, wondering aloud who this person might be. Her confusion deepened as she was informed that Rose was an alias, a name Ariel herself had devised to avoid calling the maid princess while she was in disguise. The maid, in a small thought bubble, flexed her arms, seemingly proud of the new name, while another figure in a maid outfit, also in a thought bubble, appeared to agree. Understanding the necessity of the alias, she then questioned the maid, who was now back in her own maid uniform, about her purpose as Rose. The maid, however, seemed reluctant, expressing her displeasure with a quiet no. Her excitement grew, almost to a maniacal degree, as she declared her intention to let the monster run wild, despite the potential danger if its true identity were revealed. The maid, looking up at her, appeared deeply worried by this proposition, asking if she was truly serious. Meanwhile, the princess's attention shifted, and she demanded to know where that guy had gone, her expression one of annoyance. The maid stood by, while in a separate, distressed thought bubble, the spiky-haired warrior and the hooded figure were seen screaming in terror, confirming their role as the monsters Ariel had referred to. Turning her focus back to the maid, she abruptly questioned her age, asking, "Grampy, how old are you?" The maid, surprised by the sudden inquiry, responded that she was 12. Ariel's eyes widened in disbelief, and she seized the maid by the shoulders, shaking her gently. She exclaimed that the maid was far too young to be working and urged her to remember this when she finally grew up, implying that such a young age made her unsuitable for the maid's duties. As the princess continued to express her astonishment, the maid, embarrassed, tried to protest. Ariel, however, ignored her, declaring that the maid uniform suited her perfectly. In the background, a group of other individuals, including the dark-haired warrior, several children, and other adults, all now clad in maid uniforms, looked on with expressions of distress, seemingly forced into the same attire. The maid, frustrated, shouted back at Ariel. Suddenly, a new thought struck Ariel. She announced that she needed to find a hiding place somewhere and, turning to the maid, commanded her to follow, indicating an immediate, undisclosed plan. While Ariel considered their next move, one of her companions, a young man with light hair, remained confined within a stone cell, his head bowed in apparent despair. His predicament was not lost on Ariel and Grampy, who stood nearby. Grampy, visibly frustrated, declared that no matter how many times she looked, he still made her stomach churn. Ariel, in turn, retorted that Grampy was always irritated. She then demanded information from him, specifically asking why the princess was being targeted. She urged him to speak instead of remaining silent, but he offered no response, only a pained silence. As he remained unresponsive, Grampy threatened to split his head open if he refused to speak. Ariel, with a menacing glint in her eye, echoed the sentiment, demanding to know what was going on. Finally, the captive spoke, revealing that 2 assassins resembling the princess had been sent, and that unexpected events kept occurring. Grampy, hearing this, grew even more agitated, exclaiming that they needed to deal with the situation quickly, as the villagers were involved. Ariel's expression darkened with concern. Grampy warned Ariel not to trust him, dismissing his words as mere attempts to gain sympathy. Ariel listened intently, her long hair flowing behind her. He, however, desperately pleaded for them to believe him, insisting he held no grudge against the princess and only wished to save the villagers. He cried out to the princess, begging for her trust. Grampy scoffed at his words, stating that she would not be deceived by his dirty tricks and lies, as she had known him for a long time. Ariel observed the exchange, her expression unreadable. Ariel then addressed him directly, acknowledging his past assistance and remarking that, thanks to him, she was now living a luxurious life as a princess. He looked up at her, a hint of surprise on his face, as if realizing something. Despite her cryptic remark, the captive remained defiant in his cell, cursing his predicament and wondering what was truly happening. He realized the assassins he had employed were now all gathered, and demanded to know who they truly were. As he pondered his predicament, the maid grew impatient, her voice sharp as she declared they were not patient women. She demanded he answer quickly, accusing him of dragging them into troublesome affairs. Standing beside her, Ariel interjected, stating that she had a question of her own, something she had never understood. She explained that because of him, they had ended up hiring these individuals. The captive merely looked on, confused. He glared back, his frustration evident, and revealed that besides Ariel and the maid, there was one more assassin he had sent to the princess. He then demanded to know what had become of that individual. Both Ariel and the maid reacted with profound surprise, their eyes widening at the revelation. Ariel gasped, questioning if there was indeed someone else besides them. Ariel, recovering from the initial shock, voiced her concern, wondering if this meant they might be attacked again. The maid, however, simply grumbled, declaring the situation to be a complete nuisance. The captive then elaborated on his earlier statement, explaining that he had made the request to this third person long before he had involved Ariel and the maid. He had assumed they might know something about the individual, whose image, along with those of the hooded figure and Grampy, appeared in his thoughts. He dismissed their lack of knowledge with a shrug, stating that if they didn't know, it was fine. He added that the third assassin had been quite capable and had probably made a mistake and died anyway. Ariel and the maid exchanged questioning glances. Ariel, however, was not convinced by his casual dismissal. She challenged him, asking what it meant that the assassin was not showing up, and if he was lying again, attempting to deceive them. The maid, meanwhile, pressed for the identity of the client. He merely laughed, refusing to divulge the information. He explained that if he revealed the client's identity, he would become useless to the princess and would likely be punished for his role in her assassination attempt. He lay on the cold cell floor, looking up at the princess and her maid, and offered to tell them just one thing. He then declared with conviction that he would escape from the prison by morning. The maid, however, scoffed, asking if he was bluffing again. He challenged their skepticism, asking if they truly believed it was impossible, if they thought he was utterly incapable. He urged them to anticipate his escape, for he would receive assistance. Leaning closer to the bars, he revealed his true intention. He would expose the client within the city who had commissioned the princess's assassination. Both the princess and her maid stared back, their eyes wide with shock at his audacious claim. The maid, still furious, accused him of bluffing once more, asserting there was no meaning in his words if he merely intended to lie. The princess watched, her expression etched with concern. He countered, stating that he possessed only confidence and certainty. Then, with a sneer, he called them fools for believing he would escape. Enraged by his insult, the maid lunged forward, her fists clenched, as the princess quickly grabbed her arm, calling out her name to stop her. Later, the princess found herself alone, her mind consumed by the captive's words. She wondered who the client in the castle truly was, the one who desired her demise. She remembered the prince's denial, but a profound doubt now weighed upon her, making her question the veracity of his words. Still reeling from the captive's audacious claims, the princess found herself listening as her maid, visibly agitated, declared that merely looking at the man made her want to end his life. The princess, perhaps seeking to escape the unsettling atmosphere, suggested they return. The maid continued to grumble, her frustration evident, while the princess, with a sigh, conceded that her maid's sentiment was understandable. Moments later, standing before the captive's cell, the princess's demeanor shifted. She asserted that if an interrogation were to take place, she would handle it personally, vowing to torture him thoroughly until his demise. Her maid recoiled in shock at the princess's chilling declaration, while the princess herself stood with a fierce, determined expression, her eyes narrowed in cold resolve. The next morning, the maid approached the princess, who was still in bed, and urged her to go and confirm whether the captive's threats had merely been a bluff. The maid greeted her princess, ready to face the day. Upon arriving at the dungeon, the princess inquired of a guard if there had been any unusual activity from the captive. The guard, appearing somewhat weary, reported that there had been no problems whatsoever. As they walked away, the maid, relieved, declared that the captive's words had clearly been a lie. The princess, however, still felt a gnawing unease, lamenting that she kept arriving at the same troubling conclusion. Despite the guard's report, the princess's doubts persisted. She voiced her grim realization that the most likely conclusion was that the prince himself was the client behind the assassination plot, a thought her maid immediately dismissed as impossible. Returning to the cell, the princess gasped in disbelief, her eyes wide with shock. The captive was gone, his cell empty, leaving only the maid's stunned silence. Suddenly, the captive's voice echoed from behind them, a calm greeting of, "Oh, good morning." The princess, utterly bewildered, murmured that something was amiss, while her maid, equally stunned, declared that this simply should not be happening. The maid, her face contorted in frustration, confronted the captive through the prison bars. She demanded to know why he had not escaped by morning, accusing him of enjoying his confinement. She even offered to entertain him if he was simply seeking amusement. She continued her angry tirade, asserting that he had been lying about his escape attempts. The princess, observing nearby, confirmed the maid's suspicions, stating that she had known from the beginning that he was deceiving them, and that his attempts to fool them were futile. The captive, now alone in his cell, clenched his teeth in a grimace of frustration. He cursed under his breath, his thoughts consumed by the actions of another, wondering what that guy was doing. The maid, still reeling from the captive's deception, let out a frustrated exclamation. The princess, her expression serious and suspicious, questioned if the captive's entire story had truly been a lie, repeating the word with a hint of disbelief. As the princess turned to walk away from the cell, the maid suggested they interrogate the captive immediately. However, the princess interrupted her, declaring that they would eat first. Moments later, the princess, now dressed in a maid uniform, lovingly spoon-fed a young man she addressed as prince. He appeared utterly miserable and drained, weakly accepting the food. Other maids and a butler observed the scene from a nearby table, commenting on the love-love relationship between Princess Rose and the prince. They wondered aloud if such intense affection might actually be a hindrance, while the maid from the prison looked on in confusion. The princess continued to feed him, her expression beaming with affection, while the prince, looking even more lifeless, begged her to simply kill him. She responded by asking if the food was so delicious that it was deadly. Later, the princess, still in her maid uniform, sat with a serious expression, holding a teacup. She reflected on how much had been taken from her yesterday, and a new thought dawned on her. What if the prince was the true client? She gripped the prince's hair, her eyes wide with a desperate intensity, demanding to know if he truly couldn't help Rose yesterday, if he couldn't escape the dungeon. If that were the case, then the tense interrogation continued even as the entire household gathered for a meal, the princess's words hanging heavy in the air. Among these clients, there's a possibility of a betrayer. Her gaze sharpened, eyes narrowed with suspicion as she processed the implications of her own statement. The maid beside her, noticing the princess's sudden shift in demeanor, leaned in with concern, asking what was wrong. The princess, still deep in thought, murmured that she was beginning to feel a killer's intuition in this new life, a sense that something was amiss. The maid, confused, could only respond with a hesitant ah. Her eyes widened in a sudden realization, a silent command to wait, escaping her lips as the maid tried to offer an explanation, beginning with actually. The maid, now alone, pondered the princess's words, wondering if Ariel herself could be the client, and if her long-standing relationship with the princess could be a motive. She chastised herself, calling herself an idiot for even considering such a thought. The princess, her expression stern, turned to the maid and asked if she was truly going to suspect her friends. She looked away, her face contorted in frustration, stating that it wasn't like that. The maid, looking down, then asked if the princess would not speak to her. The maid then offered a warm smile, assuring the princess that if she ever felt like talking or needed help, she would do anything in her power to assist, because she blushed, reflecting on the meaning of friends and the warmth it brought to her heart. The princess, Ariel, then approached her, expressing concern about a potential betrayer among them. She admitted she was busy teaching the children and lacked time to investigate, but the maid reassured her, stating it was all right. With the meal concluded, she declared her readiness to begin her duties for the day. As she prepared for work, she found herself surrounded by a lively group of maids and children, all appearing cheerful and eager to assist. Later, standing by a window, she pondered the princess's worries, feeling a pang of helplessness at her inability to offer support. She wondered what troubled the princess so deeply. Her thoughts continued to swirl as she realized there were certain truths that were simply too difficult to voice in their current circumstances. Suddenly, the princess flinched, her eyes wide with alarm, while the maid herself looked on with a distressed expression. She quickly admonished the princess, reminding her that as a mere maid, she must ask for tasks and not act independently. The princess, now seated, appeared visibly annoyed by the maid's words. Nearby, the prince held a captive, who looked utterly distraught. A sudden, profound realization then struck the maid, her eyes widening in shock as the truth dawned upon her. She felt a sudden, overwhelming panic, her eyes wide with terror as a chilling realization dawned upon her. Something terrible was happening, and she knew she had to act, to do something, anything, to avert disaster. Meanwhile, the other maids and the butler stood together, their expressions a mixture of confusion and concern, as if sensing the unspoken tension that now permeated the air. One of the maids, with short, light-colored hair, leaned forward, her brow furrowed as she inquired about Ariel's well-being, noticing her sudden distress. Despite her inner turmoil, the maid forced a strained smile, denying that anything was amiss, though beads of sweat betrayed her true state of anxiety. Another maid, with dark hair, then voiced her own concern, stating that she had been worried about Ariel for some time, her gaze fixed on the princess. The butler, a stern man with glasses, suddenly interjected, his voice sharp as he demanded to know the whereabouts of the prince and princess, emphasizing the need for them to be greeted. He then chastised the maids for their ignorance, revealing with a grave tone that the prince and princess were no longer present. The maids gasped in shock at this revelation, their faces contorted in disbelief. The butler continued, his voice heavy, as he began to speak of their parents. A vivid memory flashed through Ariel's mind, a younger version of herself, adorned with a tiara, weeping uncontrollably over a dying man in a bed. Her brother, a young boy, stood somberly in the doorway. The narration recounted the sudden, unnatural passing of her parents from illness. Back in the present, the maid, now revealed to be Princess Ariel, thrashed violently, attempting to break free from the grasp of the other maids who struggled to restrain her, her distress reaching a fever pitch. The distressed maid, still disguised as Rose, wept uncontrollably as her fellow maids tried to comfort her. They told her it must have been incredibly difficult for her, and offered to be her new family. However, their words of comfort only seemed to intensify her distress. She recoiled, pushing them away with a desperate cry, stating that the idea of family was quite lonely for her, and begging them not to say such things. Her outburst seemed to trigger a vivid memory or a dream, transporting her to a time when she, as Princess Ariel, lay in bed beside the prince, both appearing unwell. She asked if the prince was still there. As the memory continued, she watched the prince groan weakly beside her, both of them clearly suffering from a severe illness. Her own expression was one of deep concern and helplessness,